Chapter 4901. Yi Xiangnan pushed the check to her and said calmly, "This is 10 million yuan." He didn't say anything else, but Lin Lu understood what he meant. It was a one-time buyout. Lin Lu had always thought that she was special. She didn't think that the nightclub would give her up after realizing it. So she was stunned for a long time. Yi Xiangnan took back his hand and said calmly, "That's it. You can go out first." Lin Lu came back to her senses and said with a trembling voice, "Boss Yi, do you mean to break up?" Yi Xiangnan looked down and flipped through the documents. He said calmly, "If you think so, I will keep your position. As long as you don't make any mistakes, you can keep up with the business." Lin Lu stood there and didn't go out immediately. After a while, she bit her lower lip and said, "Boss Yi, I want to apply for a transfer overseas for 2 years." Yi Xiangnan looked up. Lin Lu pushed the check to him and smiled. "I don't want this." Yi Xiangnan didn't look at her in a different light at all. He merely furrowed his brows, closed the document in his hand, and looked up at Lin Lu. Lin Lu's lips trembled. "If you still make the same decision after 2 years, then I will leave the company." Lin Lu was gambling. She put herself in the most dusty position to please a man. She didn't want to make things difficult for a man. She just wanted a position by his side. Yi Xiangnan looked at her for a long time and said calmly, "If you insist, go to Italy. There is a branch company that needs a person in charge. I hope you can make some achievements in 2 years." Lin Lu's eyes were filled with tears. She nodded and said, "Boss Yi, I won't let you down." Yi Xiangnan tore the check and threw it into the trash can. Then he said calmly, "Go out." Lin Lu actually wanted to say something that was similar to love, but Yi Xiangnan obviously didn't want to say anything, so she could only leave. After she went out, everyone in the secretary's office looked at her. Her lips trembled and she walked straight into the elevator. She would come back, she would come back. On the other hand, Wen Yuan sat in a black limousine and went to Su Mu's place. Yi Xiangnan could ignore it, but as a grandmother, she couldn't. Wen Yuan left Star's Entertainment and went straight to the place where Su Mu lived. He didn't call, but there was no one at home. Su Mu simply waited downstairs. She sat in the car and asked the driver, old Zhang, to pay attention to the movements outside the car. At about noon, Su Mu came back. She walked back, holding the little Cymbidium chinense in her hand. When Yuan got out of the car, Su Mu slowed down her pace and smiled, "Auntie." When Yuan nodded. "Where did Cymbidium chinense go?" She was a little distressed. Cymbidium chinense's forehead was covered with fine beads of sweat. Su Mu said honestly, "I went to find a nursery for Cymbidium chinense. I want to work there." When Yuan naturally didn't object to this, but as a grandmother, of course, he had his own plans. The grandson belonged to the Yi family. Su Mu was a good girl. She didn't ask for a penny from the Yi family when she left, nor did she ask for any child support. Xiangnan, the bastard, really treated this son as if he had never existed. She couldn't just stand by and watch. When Yuan raised his chin and said, "Let's go upstairs and chat for a while." "Oh, I haven't seen my Cymbidium chinense for a few days. It seems to be much heavier when I hold it." Su Mu felt that it was inappropriate. "Let's talk in the car." Chapter 4902. Su Mu felt that it was inappropriate. Let's talk in the car. How could Wen Yuan not know about her coldness and alienation? However, she acted as though she didn't know and continued kissing the little Cymbidium chinense lovingly. "I've talked a lot with Cymbidium chinense. I'm hungry. Is our little Cymbidium chinense hungry?" Cymbidium chinense touched its little belly and sneaked a look at its mother. Su Mu couldn't pretend to be dead anymore. She coughed lightly. "Auntie, let's go upstairs and talk. I'll cook." Cymbidium chinense is hungry too. When Yuan carried Cymbidium chinense, He was strong and didn't look hungry at all. Sumu followed behind helplessly. When they got upstairs, she felt a little uneasy. After all, her place was very small and Wen Yuan had probably never seen such a small and simple house. However, Wen Yuan didn't mind at all. He sat on the sofa with Cymbidium chinense and played. Sumu poured a glass of water and placed it in front of her. Wen Yuan was very easygoing. Go do what you need to do. There's no need to call me. I'm Cymbidium chinense grandma and not an outsider. Cymbidium chinense, right? Cymbidium chinense nodded its head vigorously. Grandma is not an outsider. He still liked his grandma. Although his father wasn't good, his grandma was very good. Sumu didn't know what to do with him and went to the kitchen to cook. Wen Yuan played with Cymbidium chinense and taught it some simple counting. Actually, Wen Yuan didn't feel good in his heart. Xiangnan broke off the engagement twice in a row and both times were expected by the elders. The first time was with Yi Huan, who was a good child. The second time was with Sumu. Although she wasn't very outstanding in all aspects, she raised the Cymbidium chinense well, which made people look at her in a new light. Wen Yuan sighed and didn't say anything in the end. Sumu spent half an hour making 3 dishes and a soup. It was simple but refreshing. Wen Yuan thought it was great, but he soon remembered that Sumu was only 24 years old, and she had become a mother before she was 20. Wen Yuan silently ate a mouthful of food. Beside her, Cymbidium chinense looked at her anxiously and asked very slowly, "Grandma, is it not delicious?" Wen Yuan patted his little head lovingly, "Delicious, your mother's cooking is very delicious. Grandma hasn't eaten such delicious food in a long time." Because of this, she was even more impressed with Sumu. She felt that this girl was a down-to-earth child. While eating, they chatted. "Mumu, what kind of job are you going to find? Do you have any idea?" Sumu slowed down eating, because Wen Yuan called her a little intimately. "I'm still looking for a job. I took Cymbidium chinense to the nursery today, and I can enter the nursery tomorrow." After saying that, Sumu took another mouthful of food. Wen Yuan asked about the situation of the nursery in detail. He was relieved to know that it was a public one, so he didn't take Sumu to change schools for the time being. Then he asked about the job, and Sumu said that she could find one by herself. Wen Yuan knew that she had an accident before she graduated from college. He felt it was a pity, but he couldn't say anything. In the afternoon, Wen Yuan stayed here for about 2 hours, and then he took Cymbidium chinense out to play. The driver drove out and bought a lot of things. From food to clothing to use, there was a lot of things. But Sumu could see that they were cheap but of good quality, so she didn't feel burdened. Sumu breathed a sigh of relief. Wen Yuan didn't eat dinner again, and he was too embarrassed to let Sumu take care of it again. He just hugged Cymbidium chinense and left. There are 2 more chapters. Chapter 4903. 69 books. Remember to miss Grandma. I'll come to see you next time. Wen Yuan said with a smile, then said to Sumu, "Cymbidium chinense, if you don't have time, you can send him to our place. Grandpa Cymbidium chinense and I both have time. We miss him too." Sumu thought about it and agreed. "Thank you, Auntie." Wen Yuan left. When Sumu was clearing the table, she saw a stack of money on the table. It was about 20,000 yuan. Sumu's eyes were a little red, and she lost her composure. Cymbidium chinense leaned against her, looking obedient. After a while, he couldn't help but ask, "Did Grandma leave this?" Although Cymbidium chinense was young, it was probably because Sumu lived a poor life that Cymbidium chinense knew the concept of money early on. He knew that his father was very rich, had a big villa, wore the best clothes, and had a very soft bed. However, none of that warmed his heart as much as his grandmother's company today, and the stack of money that made his mother cry. Cymbidium chinense was very young, but he knew that his mother didn't have it easy, so he was very excited. The little person threw himself into his mother's arms and said very softly, "Mom, you still have me." Since he was young, he knew that he didn't have a father, and his mother didn't bring him to his grandmother's house. They depended on each other. He had seen his grandmother, and she was very bad to his mother. He also had an uncle. Every time his grandmother came over, it seemed like she was asking his mother for money. She said that his mother was useless and shameless, and that she was a disgrace to the Su family. Cymbidium Chinense keenly felt that he was that disgrace. However, he never dared to ask his mother, because he was afraid that his mother would be sad. At this moment, his mother seemed to be very sad, but also very happy. When Yuan returned to the villa where he lived with Yi Mubai. To her surprise, Xiangnan and Yi Hui were both there, waiting for her to eat. Yi Mubai was sitting on the sofa reading the newspaper. When he heard her coming back, he closed the newspaper. "Why did you go out for a day?" When Yuan looked at his son beside him, took off his jacket, and said calmly, "I went to see Su Mu and Cymbidium Chinense." Yi Xiangnan's eyes flickered imperceptibly. When Yuan snorted. "It's quite pitiful for a girl to bring her son outside." Yi Hui hurriedly said yes. She hoped that her brother could bring Su Mu back. When Yuan sighed. Actually, Su Mu is the same age as Yi Hui. She is still a child. As he spoke, he went to the dining table, too lazy to bother with his son. During the meal, when Yuan told him about Su Mu's situation. In the future, Cymbidium Chinense will be delivered here on Saturdays and Sundays. Xiangnan, if you miss your son, come and see him. After all, he is your biological son. You can't just ignore him. Did she complain? Yi Xiangnan said calmly. When Yuan was a little angry all of a sudden. Yi Xiangnan, do you think everyone is as scheming as your manager Lin? Yi Xiangnan rubbed his nose. Manager Lin has been transferred to Italy. You won't see her. Calm down. When Yuan was a little suspicious. Is she retreating for the sake of advancing? All right. The older, the wiser. In Yi Xiangnan's heart, he paid more attention to Lin Lu's ability. Lin Lu was indeed a capable person, so he agreed to her request. Moreover, he did not want to have anything to do with her in the future. Of course, he was not prepared to keep his chastity for Su Mu. Wasn't it normal for a loveless marriage to have some fun outside? He did not feel that he would let Su Mu down. After the meal, Yi Xiangnan and Yi Mubai discussed business matters before leaving. Chapter 4904. Yi Xiangnan returned to the villa. He felt a little tired, so he sat on the sofa and rested for a while. Auntie Chen told him what had happened during the day. Although Yi Xiangnan had already heard about Auntie Wang from Wen Yuan, he didn't mind listening to it again, as if it could relieve his boredom. Auntie Chen repeated it over and over again, and he fell asleep as he listened. Auntie Chen was a little speechless. She looked at him and finally covered him with a blanket. Yi Xiangnan woke up in the middle of the night and found that he had fallen asleep in the living room downstairs. He got up and wiped his face, quietly spacing out for a while. Then, he took out his phone and swiped a photo. It was a photo of Qin Yi Huan, the only girl he had ever liked. He had liked her for many years, but in the end, he lost to Shenting. In fact, it wasn't Shenting, but Yi Huan. After a long time of company, she still fell in love with Shenting. Indeed, children's words didn't count. No one would have thought that Shenting and Qin Yi Huan got married before Yi Xiangnan, because Yi Huan was pregnant. It was quite unexpected, but not unexpected. After all, Shenting had waited for so long. It wasn't too early to be a father at the age of 31. Yi Xiangnan received the invitation the next day. He sat alone in his office, a little stunned. After all, she was the girl he had loved all his life. After work, he wanted to pick out a gift. He didn't let his secretary do it for him, but he did it himself. He drove to the largest shopping center in the city and went straight to a jewelry store. He had stored a few sets of jewelry here for his wedding. At this time, he asked the manager to take them out. He picked out a set of pink diamonds, which was priceless and beautiful, suitable for Yi Huan. Yi Xiangnan left with the box, but when he was going to the parking lot on the first floor, he accidentally saw an inconspicuous figure, which was very familiar. He narrowed his eyes, then stood there and watched. It wasn't anyone else, but Su Mu. She was working at the counter of a branded shoe store and was squatting down to try on shoes for the customers. The customer didn't seem to be very easy to serve. He tried on several pairs of shoes in a row and was very picky. Su Mu didn't show any displeasure and still responded with a smile. In the end, the customer didn't buy it. When he got up and left, he didn't even look at Su Mu, who was squatting on the ground to clean up. He even chatted with the people around him. The design of the shoes in this shop is quite silly. The staff looks silly too. Yi Xiangnan was 5 or 6 meters away, so he could hear everything clearly. He frowned and slowly walked to Su Mu's side. This is the life you want. You want Cymbidium Chinense to follow you. Even if you sell shoes for a lifetime, you won't be able to bring anything to Cymbidium Chinense, he said coldly. Su Mu paused for a moment, then looked up at the man above her head quietly. After a long time, she whispered, "Mr. Yi, we still need to do business here, please move aside." Yi Xiangnan said without thinking, "I'll buy 10 pairs, if it's not enough, 20 pairs. Come out in half an hour." The store manager was annoyed to see a man pestering Su Mu. Su Mu had just arrived and she was already pestering a rich man. It was quite troublesome. But when he heard it carefully, he realized that it was 20 pairs of shoes. The shoes here were all worth tens of thousands, and 20 pairs were their turnover for several days. The manager changed his face quickly with an attentive smile. "Sir, would you like to pay the bill first?" Yi Xiangnan stared at Su Mu. "What size shoes do you wear?" The manager gasped again, thinking that it was a rich man who wanted to pursue Su Mu, so generous. Chapter 4905. So he couldn't help taking another look at Su Mu. She looked so ordinary, but she turned out to be a diamond from South Africa. So before Su Mu could speak, the manager made his own decision. "Mumu wears shoes of size 7. Sir, you really have a good taste. Mumu is gentle and has a good temperament." Yi Xiangnan was speechless. Su Mu couldn't bear it anymore. She didn't say anything and just wrote 20 bills. She was not stupid. If he wanted to buy, she would certainly pay. Yi Xiangnan had spent more than 300,000 without batting an eye. 10 minutes later, they were sitting in a coffee shop in the mall. He was dressed in a dignified manner, while Su Mu was still wearing the uniform of a shop assistant. She wore a black dress suit, and her hair was tied into a bun. Luckily, she was thinner, and her clothes were not ugly. However, it was a little out of place for her to sit with someone like Yi Xiangnan. Su Mu lowered her head and kept stirring the coffee in the cup without saying a word. Yi Xiangnan frowned. "Are you going to keep doing this? Squat here and sell shoes for others? What's wrong with that?" Su Mu looked up at him. "Or does Mr. Yi feel inferior?" Yi Xiangnan stared at her. "You are the mother of Cymbidium Chinense. Even Cymbidium Chinense doesn't feel ashamed. Why does Mr. Yi feel ashamed? Mr. Ye's future wife is decent enough. As for me, Mr. Yi doesn't need to worry about it." "Really?" he said in a cold voice. "Do you want Cymbidium Chinense to grow up to be like you, an ordinary person living in that kind of house and even doing inferior work in the future?" Su Mu tried his best to suppress his anger, shame, and resentment. Her little face was tight, and she whispered after a long time, "Mr. Yi, you can treat me as a stranger." "A stranger?" He seemed to be pondering these words, and then he laughed softly. "I do remember that not long ago, we seemed to have been husband and wife." His method was a little frivolous and a little nasty. Su Mu thought back to that night when he was taking a shower and Lin Lu was in his room. But now, he could still talk to her like they were husband and wife as if nothing had happened. Su Mu calmed herself down. That's the thing that disgusts me the most. As she spoke, she suddenly stood up and prepared to leave. She would feel sick if she spent another second with him. Yi Xiangnan reached out and grabbed her. He narrowed his eyes and said, "Is it disgusting to be my wife? That's not how you expressed yourself the other day. You remember being happy." Sumu didn't know what she was thinking at that time, or how angry she was. In short, she slapped Yi Xiangnan in public. The Honorable CEO of Starlight. Yi Xiangnan was probably a little stunned as well. His handsome face alternated between red and white, and there were clear fingerprints on his fingers. He glared at the woman in front of him. "Are you crazy?" Sumu was probably furious and felt that it was not enough, so she directly poured the coffee on his head from head to toe. She ran away before Yi Xiangnan could catch her. Yi Xiangnan had never suffered such a loss. He just stood there, his whole body wet, and the coffee kept falling from the ends of his black hair. At this time, some onlookers actually recognized that this was the CEO of Starlight. Immediately, someone took a photo and posted it on WeChat Moments, Weibo. They immediately imagined a story of a domineering CEO and Cinderella. However, no one could have imagined that the Cinderella just now was the female lead who gave birth to a dragon. In less than half an hour, the popularity was fermented, and the #1 trending topic on Weibo was #the woman that the CEO of Starlight couldn't get. Chapter 4906. 1 second to remember. In less than half an hour, it became the most popular topic on Weibo, #the woman that the CEO of Stars can't get. The picture was of Yi Xiangnan with coffee dripping from his head. At the same time, Yi Hui saw it. She sat on the sofa and laughed like a pig, then said, Mom, come and see, my brother kicked an iron plate." Wen Yuan immediately went over and was shocked at a glance. Xiangnan had suffered a big loss this time. "Who did it?" she asked curiously, not feeling sorry for her son at all. Yi Hui was still laughing, and Wen Yuan guessed, could it be Su Mu who did it? How could this child be so bold? She didn't feel sorry for her son at all. Yi Hui smiled and said, she even slapped him in the face. Wen Yuan also smiled and shook his head. "I didn't expect that." Yes, sister-in-law looks gentle and quiet, but how could she be so fierce? Yi Hui was in a very good mood. Wen Yuan looked at her and said, "You're happy, but don't show it in front of your brother. He's still a virgin now." Then he said with infinite yearning, "Maybe no woman dares to treat him like this." Yi Hui laughed like a pig again. On the other side, Su Mu returned to the counter. The store manager asked her all kinds of questions happily, but Su Mu always politely changed the topic to something else. Later, she couldn't avoid it, so she simply went to the warehouse to prepare shoes. Yi Xiangnan spent so much money to buy 20 pairs of shoes, and she wouldn't wear such expensive shoes. She was going to adjust them to Yi Hui's size and then send them to him. Just after she finished, the store manager ran in with her mobile phone, looking a little flustered. "Su Mu, don't tell me you did this." She pointed at Yi Xiangnan on the screen and held her breath tightly. The CEO of Stars Entertainment. Slapped in the face. Spilled coffee. And the female lead was a shop assistant in their store. Did they give Su Mu the courage of a leopard? Suddenly, the manager saw another piece of news and was dumbfounded. "Su Mu, you gave birth to a child for CEO Yi?" They were supposed to get married, but Su Mu refused to get married. God, is this brain damaged? Instead of marrying Boss Yi, she came here to sell shoes. Was there something wrong with her? The manager put his hand on Su Mu's head. He was still confused for a long time. Su Mu's voice was indifferent. "It's all in the past. There's nothing to talk about." The manager said with disappointment, "Are you stupid? CEO Yi obviously came to you because he still has feelings for you. You have to seize the opportunity. I also know that men from rich families are a bit fickle, but if it were me, as long as I have money, It's okay for my husband not to come home every day. Sumu smiled faintly. It won't be like this when the time comes. When your life is worse than that of a servant, you might as well sell shoes here. The manager didn't give up and asked in a low voice, "You really don't want that splashing wealth?" "No." Sumu put the shoes in place and said in a low voice, "I'm going to deliver the shoes." The manager didn't understand. "These are given to you by Mr. Yi. I don't want his things." Sumu said softly and then moved the shoes out one by one. She called a taxi and the manager moved them together with her. After all, they sold 20 pairs of shoes today and it was beneficial for everyone. But she just felt that Sumu was a little too straightforward. Perhaps this kind of character was really not suitable for rich families. Actually, there's nothing wrong with selling shoes, right, Sumu? The manager patted her shoulder and comforted her. Sumu smiled. Yes. Chapter 4907. When Sumu gets in the car, the manager still says, "In short, whether you like him or not, it's better for you to control your temper. He is a big shot that we can't afford to offend." If it were not Sumu today, but another woman, she probably wouldn't be able to live in this world. Sumu understands it in her heart, but she was really angry at that time and couldn't bear it. Now she calms down completely and feels that what she did was wrong. She gets in the car and nods, "Sister Chen, I know. I won't be so impulsive in the future." Sister Chen nods with satisfaction and watches the car drive away. After more than half an hour, the car stops at the door of Yi Xiangnan's villa. When Sumu moves the shoes down, Auntie Chen has already seen it. She immediately runs over and whispers, "Miss Su, why are you here?" Mr. Yi is very unhappy and embarrassed when he comes back. Sumu is quite gangster. "Auntie Chen, please move these in together." Auntie Chen looks at these shoe boxes and is surprised. "Oh, Miss Su, why do you have so many shoes? How can you wear them all?" Sumu whispers, "It's none of your business. Anyway, Mr. Yi bought them." Auntie Chen helps her move them and whispers, "Miss Su, you are also cold to Mr. Yi. Do you still call him Mr. Yi? Don't we sleep together?" Sumu turns her head and looks at Auntie Chen with some words. "I have broken off the engagement." Auntie Chen seems to be possessed by Auntie Wang today. She says with pity, "That's a loss." As for how it is a loss, Sumu knows in her heart. Isn't it the same thing? She doesn't say anything else and sits down to do her own things. However, Yi Xiangnan was in the living room. It was broad daylight, but he was not in the company. Logically speaking, there should be a changing room in his office. At least, there should be regular clothes. However, he was sitting on the sofa with a gloomy face, just like what Auntie Chen had described. Sumu didn't want to see his face. She put the things in the corner and said, "Mr. Yi, I have changed the shoes you bought to Miss Ye's size. You still dare to come?" he asked her. Sumu was a little scared, but she didn't want to pay attention to him. She bent down and wanted to leave. "The door is closed. You won't be able to leave." Yi Xiangnan got up and turned his head away. "Auntie Chen, you, go back and rest." Auntie Chen stood there. "It's not time for me to rest yet. Then I'll give you a week off with pay from now on. Let's see if you still want to poke your nose into this." Aunt Chen immediately ran away like a wisp of smoke. When it was quiet around, Sumu stared at Yi Xiangnan. "What do you want?" "Nothing. Apologize." He sat there with a gloomy face, playing with a delicate mug in his hand. Sumu probably understood that he waited for her at home on purpose. He knew that she would send the shoes to him. So she said coldly, "Mr. Yi, I'm sorry." Yi Xiangnan smiled coldly. "It sounds insincere." With that, he put down the mug in his hand gently, got up and walked towards Sumu step by step. Before Sumu reacted, he had caught her wrist. "Tell me, do you want to attract my attention?" He squinted at her. You just want to know that I'm at home. You've seen too much. Sumu struggled for a while, but failed. Instead, there was a circle of red marks on her wrist, which was a little frightening. Chapter 4908. Sumu is a little anxious. What do you want to do? Yi Xiangnan tilts his head. What do I want to do? He sneers. You don't think that nothing will happen to you if you treat me like that, do you? In the outside, he gives her a little face, but now she is in his hands, isn't she? Sumu calms down and bites her lips. I don't think Mr. Yi will force me. Yes. He seems to be a little funny. I won't force you. I will let you come back to be Mrs. Yi willingly and lie down. Sumu can't listen to it anymore, biting her lips. You are shameless. Yi Xiangnan smiles gently. It's not the first time, and you are very happy. This time, Sumu shakes off his hand, and her voice is very cold. Mr. Yi, please behave yourself. Yi Xiangnan doesn't speak, but just stares at her. Sumu turns around and leaves. The door is open. She goes back to the store, and the store manager comes to her. How is it? Did Mr. Yi accept it? Sumu says yes. She doesn't want to talk about it, and just concentrates on her work. The store manager is very enthusiastic. He is afraid that she will suffer losses, so he starts to gossip. I heard that this morning, Mr. Yi went upstairs to get a set of jewelry. A big shot in RB City is going to get married. Sumu is in a trance, and she unconsciously murmurs, Qin Yi Huan. The store manager nods and says meaningfully, Sumu, don't think about those unrealistic love affairs. What you hold in your hands is real. Take more of it now. You have a son, and he can give you jewelry worth tens of millions. Sumu, are you stupid? You don't want anything. If it's not mine, I don't want it. Sumu is checking the account, and she whispers, it's not that I can't live. The store manager didn't know what to do with her. He frowned and said, I said no. How can you be so honest? When you think of tens of millions of dollars, you can just casually wave it away. How much are these broken shoes worth? Sister Lin, let me tell you, you will definitely regret it in the future. Even if you don't care about his money, you can still make a profit by looking at his face. Who cares if he has other women outside, he will still serve his wife at home. If he doesn't want to, you can go around saying that he is sick. Sumu's worldview was about to shatter as she stared at the manager. That was possible? He was really too strong. Sister Lin nodded, of course we can. If he does something, we'll do the same. People like you can't do it, so you have to be more aggressive. Sumu frowned. Fierce? She thought that if she was aggressive, she would have been kicked out of bed by Yi Xiangnan in less than 2 days. That man's temper was really bad. He was quite arrogant and absolutely strong. He was like that in every aspect and place, even. Sumu didn't want to think about what happened in the past. Her face was a little hot. She really didn't like Yi Xiangnan. Another advantage of not getting married was that she didn't have to face him anymore. God knows if he was Tian. Sister Lin said something from the bottom of her heart, everyone knows about you and Mr. Yi. There will be some trouble in the future. You have to be mentally prepared. Sumu nodded, I understand. She had been back for a while, and she already felt that the eyes around her were different. Sumu didn't care about it. She still had a child to feed, and she still had to work. How could she be so free? After she finished her work, it was almost time to get off work. When she returned home, she met an unexpected person. It seems like there are still 6 chapters left today. Chapter 4909. Sumu stood there and looked at the woman in front of her quietly. Perhaps because she had been living a life of failure for a long time, her originally delicate face had turned a little mean, and even her black hair had a few more strands of white. That was Sumu's mother, Wang Yuanka. Wang Yuanka was not bad-looking and was born in a well-off family. After marrying Sumu's father, her life was good. However, Sumu's father loved to gamble, and after a few years of marriage, he squandered the family fortune, leaving only an old house and 3 children. Su Mu was the oldest, but she was also the least favored, because she looked the most ordinary. Su Jian, who was younger than her by 2 years, was much more loved, and the youngest, Su Yuan, was pampered to the heavens by Wang Yuanke. When Su Mu was pregnant, Wang Yuanke pulled her to abort the child, but Su Mu was unwilling, and Wang Yuanke threw her things out of the house, claiming that she did not have a daughter anymore. All these years, Su Mu had a bad life, and so did the rest of the Su family. Su Yuan often asked for money from Su Mu, and if Su Mu had some, she would give some. But now that she was living like this, how much could she give? In the past few years, this was the number of times the mother and daughter saw each other. At this time, Wang Yuanke came personally, and Su Mu's heart skipped a beat. She knew that it wouldn't be something pleasant. She walked over and called out to her mother. Wang Yuanke's voice was cold, without a single bit of human emotion. "If you still call me mother, help the family this once." Su Mu clenched her fists, listening to her mother continue in a calm voice. "Your father lost more than 100,000, and your sister is going to a private university, and the family has to pay for the tuition. Where does the family have the money now?" Su Mu lowered her eyes. "How much do you want?" Wang Yuanke stared at her. "At least 200,000. "I don't have that much money." Su Mu let out a long sigh. "If I don't pay Dad back his money, he won't dare to go there again. He'll also be more obedient. Why do you always give him so much money? Also, the situation at home isn't good. Why did Jian go to a private university? It's not like she doesn't know about the situation at home." Su Mu was somewhat speechless. Wang Yuanke rebuked her. "Family situation? Su Mu, if you were more considerate of your family's situation, you wouldn't have cancelled the wedding. You can't be reasonable for the sake of your family. You know, because of the scandal you did, our Su family has been looked down upon by others for so many years. Now it's time for you to repay us." Su Mu was a little stunned. After a while, she said softly, "Mom, I only have a little more than 10,000 yuan. As for the money that Wen Yuan gave her, she couldn't touch it. It was for Cymbidium Chinense. Cymbidium Chinense needed money to dress, eat, and go to school. She couldn't give everything she had to Wang Yuanke. Moreover, if she gave it to Wang Yuanke today, she wouldn't be able to fill this big hole." After Su Mu finished speaking, Wang Yuanke's eyes were absent-minded for a while. Then, she pressed down on Su Mu's shoulder. Her strength was so strong that it pinched Su Mu's shoulder until it was red and painful. "Why don't you ask the Yi family for money? Their family is so rich. You can easily have millions and tens of millions. Why are you so cheap? You gave birth to a son for nothing." Su Mu's face was pale. After a long time, she said in a low voice, "Mom, you're hurting me." Wang Yuanke was anxious. Her voice was particularly sharp, and the words she said became more and more unpleasant. "You still know pain? Why didn't you feel pain when you messed around with men and gave birth to a child for others? Why don't you think about your family?" Chapter 49:10. Memorize. Su Mu's face became even uglier. She didn't know where she got the strength to push Wang Yuanke away. "I gave birth to the child and raised him myself. Mom, you don't have to make it sound so bad. Dad and Jian are both adults. They should be responsible for themselves. It's true that you gave birth to me, but I don't have to take everything on myself. It's fine if you don't like me, but I don't have to be the scapegoat for my family's mistakes." As soon as she finished speaking, Wang Yuanke slapped her angrily. "You've grown up, haven't you? Let me tell you, if you don't want to go to the Yi family, I'll help you." A red mark immediately appeared on Su Mu's face. She was embarrassed and angry, but the other party was her mother. She couldn't fight back. She could only stare at Wang Yuanke, and her eyes were red. At this time, A rich woman got out of a black RV on the side of the road. It was none other than Wen Yuan. Wen Yuan had seen the dispute between the mother and daughter long ago. He didn't come down because he didn't want to embarrass Sumu, but at this time, she actually hit someone. Wen Yuan suddenly felt sorry for her. Which girl wasn't the favorite of their parents? Sumu's mother was too fierce. On the other hand, Sumu was Yi Xiangnan's child. Wen Yuan felt that Sumu must have suffered a lot for this, so she had to stand up for him. Wen Yuan came over and gently held Sumu's shoulder. His voice was very soft. This must be Sumu's mother. Why did you hit our Mumu? Wang Yuanka was stunned. It seemed that Sumu was the other party's daughter, and she was a thug. Sumu was also stunned. She turned to look at Wen Yuan. Auntie, why are you? I brought something to Cymbidium Chinense. Wen Yuan said gently, go up and put ice on your face first. Don't let the child see you receive Cymbidium Chinense later. Sumu was a little uneasy. Wen Yuan patted the back of her hand. Leave it to me. I'll take care of it. Sumu was still feeling uneasy. However, Wen Yuan's gaze didn't allow her to refuse. His powerful aura made Sumu listen to him subconsciously and turn around to go upstairs. Seeing that she had left, Wang Yuan became indignant. She cried out, Sumu, what do you mean by that? Are you not going to care about your father and sister anymore? Mrs. Su, let's talk. Don't make things difficult for the child. Wang Yuanka was afraid of Wen Yuan's imposing manner, but she didn't want to let go of this opportunity. She stared at the huge ring on Wen Yuan's finger, feeling a little envious and jealous. Then she straightened her back. I wonder what Madame Yi wants to talk about. Does Mrs. Yi have anything to do with me lecturing my daughter? Wen Yuan said calmly, it's true that Sumu is your daughter, but she's also the mother of Cymbidium Chinense. Do you think I should interfere in this matter? Wang Yuanka caught the meaning of his words at once and smiled coldly. So what if she's the mother of Cymbidium Chinense? She's not the daughter-in-law of the Yi family. Wen Yuan was still calm. Mrs. Su, you're looking for Sumu just to ask for money. Our Yi family can afford it, but it's not a betrothal gift. It's a buyout. It's a buyout. You've raised Sumu for 20 years. After taking this money, no matter what happens in the Su family, don't harass Sumu anymore. Otherwise, I think with the Yi family's ability, it's not a problem for them to disappear. Wang Yuanka felt a chill in her heart and was a little timid. However, she needed money, and she hoped that Wen Yuan could give her a good price. Chapter 49:11. Updated quickly, Wang Yuanka's heart sank when she heard those words. She was a little timid, but she needed money, and she hoped that Wen Yuan could give her a good price. Yes, even if she wanted to sell her daughter now, she couldn't care less about her face. Wang Yuanka's face was full of desire and ambition. Wen Yuan said lightly, is 10 million enough? Wang Yuanka couldn't believe it. Her heart was trembling, and her mean face was full of confusion. After a while, she said with a trembling voice, really? Wen Yuan's face was cold. I have a few conditions. First, don't let Sumu know. Second, don't look for Sumu in the future. Third, Wen Yuan's eyes were much colder. You publish in the newspaper that you break off your relationship with Sumu, and Sumu will have nothing to do with the Su family in the future. Wang Yuanka was completely stunned. She just looked at Wen Yuan. She was a little hesitant. Wen Yuan said lightly, you only have one chance, Mrs. Su. Wang Yuanka trembled for a long time, and then she gritted her teeth. I agree. Wen Yuan went back to the car, took out a checkbook, wrote a group of numbers, and gave it to Wang Yuanka. I hope Mrs. Su can keep her promise. Of course. Wang Yuanka's hands couldn't stop trembling. Holding the check, she felt that her life had reached the peak. 10 million, excluding the money she needed, could buy a house in the suburbs. Wang Yuanka left with the check in ecstasy. When Yuan's voice came from behind quietly. "Mrs. Su, I hope you can keep your promise." Wang Yuanka turned around. "Mrs. Yi, don't worry. I will keep my promise," she said coldly. "Besides, I don't want her anymore." Su Mu came downstairs and happened to hear such a sentence. Her face turned pale. When Yuan heard the footsteps and turned to look. But Wang Yuanka was staring straight at Su Mu. Their mother-daughter relationship had always been thin, and the number of times they had met in the past few years could be counted on one hand. Now, they were no different from strangers. Wang Yuanka looked at it for a long time before saying softly, "Yes, that's how it is, Su Mu. From now on, we'll go our separate ways and we'll have nothing to do with each other anymore." Su Mu kept looking at her mother. Her lips were white. After a long time, she said in a low voice, "Mother, I'm sorry. I understand." After all, Su Mu was her own mother. She said in front of others that she didn't want her anymore and that they wouldn't be related in the future. It was impossible for Su Mu to remain indifferent. Wang Yuanka walked without hesitation, but she paused for a moment. However, he still left. Su Mu stood there for a long time. There were still traces of Wang Yuanka's slap on her face. She barely managed to cover it up after applying some foundation makeup. When Yuan knew that she was upset, so he said in a low voice, "Since we are not fated to be together, don't force it." Su Mu suddenly said, "Thank you, Auntie." She knew that when Yuan had paid her off. Otherwise, Wang Yuanka wouldn't have left so easily. When Yuan patted her. "Don't stand on ceremony with me. Think about it and let's go pick up Cymbidium chinense. It's getting late, and we shouldn't let the child wait for too long." Su Mu nodded and got into the car with Wen Yuan. Wen Yuan would come over to visit Cymbidium chinense from time to time. She felt embarrassed and didn't want to trouble him, so she would take the initiative to send Cymbidium chinense over on weekends and refuse to be picked up by the limousine. If Cymbidium chinense wanted to grow up like an ordinary child, then there was no need for such extravagance to prevent his mentality from changing. Chapter 49:12. In the car, Su Mu was still quiet and didn't make a sound. When Yuan patted her shoulder gently and asked in a low voice, "Does it still hurt?" Su Mu shook her head. When Yuan didn't disturb her. Su Mu needed time. About 10 minutes later, they arrived at the nursery. Cymbidium chinense was very happy. It threw itself into Wen Yuan's arms and called her grandmother, and then politely called her mother. Seeing Cymbidium chinense, Su Mu's mood was a little better. When Yuan held his little grandson and looked at Su Mu. Suddenly, he said, "Tonight is Friday. I want to bring Cymbidium chinense to my house. Why don't you go and have a meal? Yi Hui says that she can't see you all day. She says that every time you send Cymbidium chinense, you don't go to see her." Since Wen Yuan said that, Su Mu naturally couldn't refuse. She owed Wen Yuan and Yi Hui a favor. So she nodded and agreed. Cymbidium chinense was so happy that it cried out. However, when Su Mu followed them to the Yi family's house, she found that Yi Xiangnan was also there. This was not deliberately arranged by Wen Yuan. Yi Xiangnan just happened to have something to do. As soon as he sat down, he found that Su Mu had come over. They had just met during the day. At this time, he was a little unhappy, so he looked at her again. But this time, he found that there was something wrong with her. There were a few indistinct finger marks on Su Mu's face, which he could see clearly from this angle. Yi Xiangnan couldn't help but look at his mother. When Yuan gave him a look. Su Mu was a little embarrassed. At this time, when Yuan still wanted to give them some time to get along, so he sent Yi Hui and Cymbidium chinense away. In the living room, only Su Mu and Yi Xiangnan were left. Yi Xiangnan's voice was a little arrogant. "What's wrong? Were you also slapped by someone?" Su Mu turned her face away and didn't want to speak. Originally, Yi Xiangnan thought that she was embarrassed at work. He knew the faces of those clients, but now it seemed that it was not the case. He frowned and asked softly, "Who did it?" Sumu didn't answer, but she didn't say that it had nothing to do with him. Yi Xiannan's gaze then turned to his mother. His intuition told him that his mother knew. When Yuan threw him a look from afar, letting him experience it for himself. 1. When Yuan looked at him and said, Su mu, it's Yi mu. Yi 1 1 1 1. 1 1 1 1 1 1 1 1 1. Sumu refused, but it was useless. Yi Xiangnan was very polite and wanted to see her off. Sitting in his car, Sumu didn't say anything. Yi Xiangnan turned on the music. At the third red light, he turned off the music and turned his head. Did your mother come to see you? Sumu looked like a cat whose tail had been stepped on. Yi Xiangnan said in a low voice, "It's not my mother. Don't think too much. It's just my guess." If he wanted to marry her, he naturally knew everything about her family. Sumu just looked at him and didn't say a word. Yi Xiannan reached out a hand and gently touched her face. To her surprise, her skin was exceptionally smooth. He smiled and said, "I'll hit the other side, so it's symmetrical." Sumu shrank. Yi Xiangnan said in a bad way, "What's wrong? Are you afraid? Why weren't you afraid when you slapped me?" Sumu turned her head away and didn't want to talk to him. Yi Xiangnan smiled again, and his eyes were deep. "You're too soft-hearted, which is why you're living a mess." He had already received news that his mother had written a check for 10 million yuan today. Since Sumu was his family, it wasn't too much for him to ask about it. But would the family be willing to let go of a money tree if they got wealth too easily? Probably not, right? I can't write anymore. I'll update tomorrow. Chapter 49:13. Sumu doesn't speak, but just lowers her eyes. Yi Xiangnan sneers, "What's wrong? You don't want to admit it?" "No." She denies it immediately. Yi Xiangnan still wants to say something, but the green light turns green. He can only drive the car away again. The car arrives at Sumu's downstairs. She says thank you and is about to get off. The car door is locked from the inside. Sumu puts her hand on the car door. She turns around and looks at Yi Xiangnan. "Mr. Yi, please drive the car door away." However, Yi Xiannan gently unbuckled her seatbelt and turned sideways with a somewhat nasty expression on her face. "Sumu, you should be considered a member of our Yi family now, right? What, do you still have that worthless pride of yours?" He doesn't know why he wants to make life difficult for her. Maybe he is angry that she slapped him in the daytime. Sumu bit her lips and said, "Mr. Yi is right. My pride is worthless. So please let me go, Mr. Yi, okay? What if I don't?" Yi Xiannan smiled softly. Sumu kicks the car door. As a result, her hand is caught by him. Sumu is stunned. Yi Xiangnan frowns and asks what he wants to ask. "Do you hate me so much?" In his heart, he thinks that they can live together as long as they don't disturb each other's life. But he doesn't expect that she doesn't want to live with him at all. He doesn't understand why she doesn't like him. Is it because his appearance is not as good as she likes? Or she doesn't like the life given to her? Or she likes such a simple life? Well, he can move in and see how diligent she can be. Sumu looks at him quietly, and then says softly, "In fact, I don't hate you, Yi Xiangnan. It's just that we don't have the same views, so it's difficult for us to live together." She paused. "It's just that we don't like each other, so we don't want to compromise." How can Mr. Yi not understand such a simple truth? It's not that you care, it's just that things didn't go your way, so you're a little annoyed. As for what happened at noon, I'll apologize, or you can splash water on me or slap me. I won't fight back. After talking for a long time, Yi Xiangnan's expression didn't look too good. His fingers also touched her face, and his voice was low. What did you think at that time? Weren't you afraid that I would take revenge on you, or did you think that I wouldn't do it? Sumu bit her lips. She wanted to turn away, but he didn't give her the chance. His slender fingers held onto her sharp chin, and only then did he realize that she was really, really skinny, so skinny that it felt like she was just a pile of bones. Yi Xiangnan thought back to that day. It wasn't that he hadn't thought about it before. He was indeed very thin. At this moment, he probably thought of it, and the look in his eyes was a little different. Sumu looked at him a little defensively, and her body couldn't help moving to one side. Are you afraid? Yi Xiangnan smiled, or looking forward to it. He was very sure that Sumu should have only one man now. Although he wasn't experienced in killing for a long time, he still had a little bit of confidence. She was naturally a pure girl before. After giving birth to Cymbidium chinense, how could she have a chance to find a boyfriend? He didn't know why, but this discovery made him feel very happy, indescribably happy. The way he looked at her was a little bit bad. Sumu didn't want to talk to him. She knew what he was talking about. Chapter 49:14. Sumu didn't want to talk to him. She knew what he was talking about. Even now he was asking for her, after they had broken off the engagement. He was so shameless. Sumu felt that she had nothing to attract him. She didn't have a figure or a face, and her temper was even worse. She lowered her eyes and said softly, Mr. Yi, I think you may have misunderstood me. I will not be that kind of woman. What kind of woman? He asked deliberately. Sumu raised her eyes and stared at him for a while without saying anything. Yi Xiangnan smiled, with my woman? Sumu turned her head away. She was a little stubborn. Yi Xiangnan's palm fell on her hair gently, and his voice was very low. I think you are more suitable to be a wife. You are not suitable to be outside. I have never thought so. As a woman, her appearance was not good enough. But Yi Xiangnan refused to think about it. She was not good enough to be a wife. Her only advantage was Cymbidium chinense. After he said that, Sumu turned her head and looked at Yi Xiangnan. Mr. Yi, I am not suitable to be your wife either. He understood what she meant. She would be uncomfortable with those messy women outside and couldn't accept them. He didn't force her. Anyway, she would go back and beg him to marry her. Because the Su family itself was a time bomb. He didn't know why he said this to her so kindly tonight. Maybe it was because he saw her being beaten, so he felt a little sorry for her. But it seemed that she didn't need it. Yi Xiangnan really felt that Sumu didn't love him. Not to mention love, not even a little good feeling. As a man who had been superior since childhood, this was quite a blow to his self-esteem. After all, there were too many women who threw themselves at him in the past. There were very few women who didn't love him. Besides, her condition was really mediocre. Yi Xiangnan had no other intentions. He just wanted the Cymbidium chinense to receive the best education and care. He even had a headache when it came to Sumu. After sitting for a while, he suddenly said, It's actually easier to accept if you don't love me, isn't it? Suddenly, he stared into her eyes. You, like someone else, or are you still in love with someone else? That was why she couldn't accept such a boring marriage. When Yi Xiangnan asked, Sumu's face turned pale, but she didn't deny it. In fact, she used to like someone, but after some things happened, she couldn't face him anymore. Now that Yi Xiangnan said it, she felt a stab in her heart. Those dusty past events were all alarmed. Sumu's face was as pale as paper, and she couldn't say a word. Yi Xiangnan's heart sank, and his voice became a little hoarse. Is there really such a person? Mr. Yi, don't you think you care too much about it? Sumu's face looked outside. After a while, she whispered, That was a long time ago. There really was such a person. He used to occupy Sumu's heart. He was the mother of his child. Although they didn't get married, she gave birth to the Cymbidium chinense for him. So in Yi Xiangnan's subconscious, Su Mu was his woman and belonged to him. Now, he knew that there was a man in her heart all the time. It was a strange feeling. Chapter 49:15. Perhaps it was because men cared about certain things the most, so he asked abruptly, "You and him, did you?" He didn't say the last few words, but Su Mu could guess it. She glared at him. Actually, Yi Xiangnan also knew that he was overthinking. When they were pregnant with Cymbidium chinense, she was still a little girl, and it was even more impossible for her to have the chance to be with that person. He was just curious about what kind of man she would like with her personality. However, Yi Xiangnan didn't think that that person worked at Stars Entertainment, and his position wasn't low either. At this moment, he felt very uncomfortable, but he didn't know where this discomfort came from. In the end, he opened the car door and said coldly, "Get out." Su Mu got out of the car. The moment she got out, she felt a little cold, and she reached out to hug herself. And Yi Xiangnan's sports car drove away. He was in a bad mood. It wasn't that he cared about Su Mu that much, but he felt that he had been abandoned. He thought that she wouldn't like any man. She was weird and had a bad temper, so how could she like men? But it turned out that it wasn't like that. She would also look at other men with admiration. What was so good about that man? Could he be better than him? Yi Xiangnan felt very uncomfortable, very uncomfortable. His male pride had been challenged like never before. He drove home and threw himself on the big bed. Turning his head, he could still smell the faint fragrance on the pillow. It was Su Mu's scent. Actually, she wasn't bad as his wife. At least he didn't hate her, and he didn't reject being in the same room with her. He said that Su Mu was useless, but it was actually wrong. She was just right. Yi Xiangnan fell asleep after a long time. That night, he had a messy dream. He dreamed that Su Mu married someone else. When he woke up, he felt that it was absurd. On the other side, after spending Saturday and Sunday, Su Mu was off on Monday. After sending Cymbidium chinense to school, she received a call from Stars Entertainment's secretary, saying that there was a document for her to re-sign. There was a little problem with the previous one. Su Mu guessed that there was a problem with the property agreement she had signed before, so she didn't refuse and directly agreed. When they arrived at Stars Entertainment, the secretary took her to see Lawyer Chen instead of Yi Xiangnan. Su Mu heaved a sigh of relief. If she could, she didn't want to see Yi Xiangnan either. However, when she arrived at the small conference room, she was stunned. Not only was Lawyer Chen there, but there was also a familiar yet strange person. It was someone that Su Mu knew. Long time no see. She murmured his name. Wen Xian. Shen Wenshuan was also surprised and even shocked. He stared at Su Mu. He couldn't believe that the person written on the document was the Su Mu he was looking for. She had a son with President Yi, and they were going to get married, but now the engagement was cancelled. Shen Wenshuan was Su Mu's senior in university. He was 2 years older than her and graduated from the law department. Now he was in the legal team of Stars Entertainment and was considered Lawyer Chen's favorite student. Lawyer Chen thought highly of him. But now, from Lawyer Chen's point of view, his favorite student seemed to have a relationship with Miss Su, and this relationship might make President Yi unhappy. Lawyer Chen also watched Yi Xiangnan grow up, so he knew his character very well. He probably didn't want to see Miss Su and Shen Wenshuan reunite after such a long time. Lawyer Chen felt a headache. He shouldn't have asked Wen Xian to come. Chapter 49:16. He thought about how he had to resolve the matter. At the very least, he wouldn't give them a chance to be alone, or he wouldn't let Xiangnan see them. However, just as they were looking at each other, Yi Xiangnan pushed open the door and entered. He said casually, "Lawyer Chen, how was it?" Then, Yi Xiangnan's gaze froze. He looked at the couple in silence. Even a blind man could tell that they were having an affair. Moreover, Yi Xiangnan wasn't blind. Yi Xiangnan gritted his teeth and narrowed his eyes. Lawyer Shen, please leave us. I have something to say to Miss Su. Wow, the adulterer was in his company. If he remembered correctly, Shen Wenshuan had been in the company for less than 3 years. Lawyer Chen had mentioned him to him several times and thought highly of him. Even Bai Anan had said that Shen Wenshuan was a good lawyer and had a bright future. Yi Xiangnan gritted his teeth and thought to himself, yes, he's not bad. Su Mu has good taste. After he finished speaking, Shen Wenshuan smiled calmly. CEO Yi, I'll leave first. Then, he nodded at Lawyer Chen and glanced at Su Mu before leaving. Lawyer Chen knew what to do. He smiled and said, go and tidy up the case we were discussing just now. We'll discuss it later. Shen Wenshuan nodded and left. He was elegant. When they left, Lawyer Chen also packed up his things and left. Then I'm almost done. He wanted to send his favorite student away. He was in a difficult position. On one side was the child he had watched grow up, and on the other side was the student he admired. It wouldn't be good for either of them. However, it seemed that Miss Su had more feelings for Shen Wenshuan. After Lawyer Chen left, Su Mu woke up from her daze and instinctively wanted to leave. Yi Xiangnan stopped her. Aren't you going to explain? Explain what? Su Mu asked coldly. Yi Xiangnan sneered, even if you think about it, it's hard to guard against a thief in the family. Su Mu was furious. Yi Xiangnan, what do you mean? He grabbed her hand. Don't you know what I mean? You like that Shen girl, don't you? Madman, I don't know what you're talking about. Su Mu's voice was cold. She wanted to shake his hand off, but she couldn't. Not only did he not let go of her, he even pushed her against the wall. When Su Mu struggled free, she felt pain in her chin. He was like a dog, he would bite. In fact, Yi Xiangnan wasn't any better. He snorted coldly and said, you're keeping yourself chaste for your first love? Why weren't you like this before? Weren't you happy? Why can't you stand it now? She raised her hand to slap him. He had gone too far. Yi Xiangnan grabbed her hand and said coldly, do you think you can slap me again and again? Su Mu, don't be arrogant. Not to mention her, even Lin Lu had to respect him. When he was unhappy, Lin Lu didn't dare to make a sound. She even dared to slap him again and again. Did she really think that she could do whatever she wanted after giving birth to a son for him? Yi Xiangnan, isn't it good for us to go our separate ways? She turned her head away. Shen Wenshuan and I are not what you think. We haven't seen each other for a long time. It's good that we meet again. We can continue our relationship. Yi Xiangnan snorted. Don't tell me you don't think that way. Your eyes can't lie to me. You like that gigolo. Su Mu was furious. She blurted out, yes, I like him. What's wrong with that? Can't I like him? After that, the air seemed to freeze. Chapter 49:17. After Su Mu finishes her words, Yi Xiangnan stares at her with a terrible expression. After a long time, he squints, don't forget that you are the mother of Cymbidium chinense. Don't you feel ashamed to love a man? What's there to be ashamed of? You are also the father of Cymbidium chinense. You can sleep with another woman in the same room. Why can't I love someone else? Su Mu lowers her eyes. What's there to be ashamed of? You're Ya Sun's father too. You can sleep in the same room with another woman in public. Why can't I like someone else? Then, she feels a little sad. She almost forgets that there is such a person. Shen Wenshuan is her senior, the best one in the school. Su Mu is very ordinary, but no one expects that it is Shen Wenshuan who pursues Su Mu, and he pursues Su Mu as soon as she enters the school. Su Mu doesn't believe it herself, but she can't resist it. Shen Wenshuan is the kind of excellent and pragmatic boy. Many girls in the school like him. When Shen Wenshuan holds Su Mu's hand and walks on the campus for the first time, everyone's eyes are wide open. It's unexpected. Su Mu thinks that if it weren't for the accident that night, she and Shen Wenshuan might get married now and have children soon. But there is no if in life. The reality is that she is an unmarried mother now. And Shen Wenshuan seems to be a thing of her last life. Seeing him today, Su Mu seems to remember that she is only 24 years old. She feels that these years are very long, and she feels very old. Yi Xiangnan looks at Su Mu's absent-minded look and sneers, "What? Are you missing the past?" "Su Mu, it's useless for you to miss it. With Shen Wenshuan's present conditions and status, how can he be willing?" "Don't say it." Su Mu's voice is very low. "I know my identity, and I don't need Mr. Yi to emphasize it again and again." She adjusts her mood. "I have signed the documents. Mr. Yi, I'm leaving." She took a step forward but was still stopped by Yi Xiangnan. His large hand firmly grasped her wrist. "Are you going to look for him?" Yi Xiangnan asked in a low voice. "Do you like her that much? You can't forget her and can't wait to see her again?" Su Mu pursed her lips. "I don't know what you mean, but I don't need to tell you." "Yi Xiangnan, Mr. Yi, we have nothing to do with each other." "Really?" Yi Xiangnan sneered. "I thought you and I both knew that you belong to the Yi clan now." Su Mu said resolutely and decisively, "I'm not. Sorry." She pulls her hand away, opens the door, and leaves. Yi Xiangnan stands in the small conference room, and his mood is very chaotic. He calls her here just to let her think about it again. After all, few women can refuse such wealth. But subconsciously, he hopes that she can refuse. If she regrets soon, she will be no different from other women. At this time, he finds that he actually has expectations for Su Mu. What does he expect? She can be so beautiful even with her eyes closed. She is just different from others. Will he love her well after marrying her? Yi Xiangnan lets her go, because in his heart, even if Su Mu is willing, Shen Wenshuan should know how to choose. After all, men are realistic. A woman with a child, it is really not necessary to reunite. But sometimes, there will be some exceptions. Su Mu walks out of the Stars building and stands in front of the bus station, waiting for the bus. A gentle voice comes from behind. "Su Mu." Chapter 49:18. 69 books. Her body froze for a moment and she turned around. It was Shen Wenshuan. Su Mu looked at him for a long time. The sunlight shone through the canopy and shone on them, reflecting the golden light of amber. Su Mu smiled. "Long time no see." Shen Wenshuan also smiled. "Yeah, long time no see, Su Mu," he said in a relaxed tone. "Let's have a cup of coffee. It's been a long time and I don't know if you're doing well." Actually, he should know by now whether she was doing well or not. After all, the news of her in Yi Xiangnan was everywhere in the newspapers. As long as he searched carefully, he would know. Su Mu looked at the time and agreed. 5 minutes later, they sat together in a cafe opposite Starlight. Su Mu sat down and Shen Wenshuan brought the coffee over and sat opposite her. "Your favorite hazelnut flavor." Su Mu took a sip and smiled. "You still remember?" "Of course." Shen Wenshuan's gaze fell on her face and he said softly, "I looked for you for a long time." He didn't tell her that he had taken half a year off from school to find her. He looked for her everywhere but couldn't find her. The Su family kept their mouths shut, and when he was desperate, they said that there was no Su Mu in the family. Shen Wenshuan had a bad feeling at that time, but he didn't expect that the male lead would be his current boss and boss. If it were someone else, he might have backed down, but he hadn't fallen in love with anyone all these years. He felt that when he met her again, she didn't marry Yi Xiangnan, which was enough to prove that there was still a possibility of them being together. He knew that she had a child, but he didn't care that much. Because he cared more about whether she was still there or not. He had waited for many years. Shen Wenxuan didn't say it out loud. He just said that he was looking for her. Su Mu had been quiet, just like in the past. She held the coffee in her hand, which was wrapped in a layer of paper. It was a little warm, just like the feeling Shen Wenxuan gave her. She lowered her eyes and said softly, "Yes, it's just as you think. There was an accident. I'm pregnant." She wanted to continue, but Shen Wenxuan gently stopped her. He knew that it was not a very pleasant memory, a mixture of pain and embarrassment. If he could, he would rather listen to her in a more private space. Perhaps in the near future. "Su Mu, I know." He looked at her gently. "How are you now?" Su Mu was taken aback for a moment, then murmured, "It's all right." Shen Wenxuan smiled. "That's good." He sipped his coffee slowly and told her how he was doing. He said a lot, and Su Mu listened very carefully. They were like two old friends sitting together and chatting. In the end, Su Mu was shocked to find that he said a lot to express one thing. He was still single. The atmosphere was a little strange. After all, she was an adult. Su Mu looked straight at Shen Wenxuan, forgetting to control her expression. Shen Wenxuan smiled faintly. "My parents have already emigrated. I live alone and don't usually have a meal. I don't know if I can come to your place for a meal." Su Mu was stunned again. Shen Wenxuan was still smiling. "If you go to work sometimes, I can help you with some Bidium Chinese." Su Mu was stunned and didn't say anything for a long time. Shen Wenxuan said calmly, "I might have to set up my own law firm, so I'll be a little busy at the beginning." Su Mu shook her head and came back to her senses. She said softly, "You don't have to worry about me. I know you have a good future in Stars Entertainment." Chapter 49:19. Su Mu shook her head and said softly, "You don't have to worry about me. I know you have a bright future in Stars Entertainment." Shen Wenxuan smiled faintly, "I had plans before, but there's still half a year left on the contract." Su Mu felt a little pressured. She didn't want to change someone else's life because of her. Besides, she had just met Shen Wenxuan, so she didn't think about that. Shen Wenxuan smiled faintly, "Don't feel too pressured. You know my partner, Bai Anan, CEO Ye's cousin. Yi Xiangnan and Bai Anan were born in the same year. They were only born a month apart." Su Mu knew that Bai Anan's law firm was the biggest in B City. Shen Wenxuan had been working with her for a long time. Shen Wenxuan smiled and didn't say much, nor did he give her too much pressure. Later, they walked out of the cafe together. It was getting late, so Shen Wenxuan invited her to dinner again. It wasn't until 1 in the afternoon when Su Mu had to go to work. She then parted ways with Shen Wenxuan. At the same time, the atmosphere in the CEO's office in Stars Entertainment was very cold. Lawyer Chen sighed in his heart. What was going on? Shen Wenxuan was his favorite student. He thought that he would restrain himself. Su Mu had broken off the engagement with CEO Yi, but the child was still CEO Ye's. It meant that she had done that with CEO Yi. He had to avoid arousing suspicions. Old Chen didn't know what his favorite student was thinking. It was too risky. He let out a long breath and looked at Yi Xiangnan. "I think it might be a misunderstanding. Wenxuan just went out to do something." Yi Xiannan sat in a leather chair, fiddling with a phone in her hand. He raised the phone and looked at Old Chen. Old Chen's heart skipped a beat and he couldn't help but take it. There were a few high-definition pictures on Yi Xiangnan's phone. The male and female leads were none other than Old Chen's favorite student, Shen Wenxuan, and the mother of Yi Xiangnan's child, Su Mu. Lawyer Chen was speechless. Yi Xiangnan said calmly, "Drinking coffee for an hour and eating for an hour and a half. This is going to take a long time. What do you think, Uncle Chen?" In the face of a man who was crazily jealous, Lawyer Chen couldn't openly protect him. He just played along. Actually, long time no see. You talk a lot. As he spoke, he carefully returned the phone to Yi Xiangnan. Yi Xiangnan's expression was still very ugly. Lawyer Chen thought about it and said, "It's natural for young people to be a bit impulsive. If you care about it, I'll go talk to him." Yi Xiangnan tilted his head and said calmly, "I just don't want the people in the company to get involved in too many personal matters." Yi Xiangnan's son would have to call his subordinate father in the future. Just thinking about it made him shudder. He thought that this was the main reason, not because he couldn't bear to part with that woman. What was so good about her? She didn't look stunning, but she was still flirting around. Lawyer Chen left his office and went straight to Shen Wenxuan. Shen Wenxuan continued working as soon as he came back. He didn't take a lunch break. Lawyer Chen knocked on the door and looked up. "Teacher." He stood up immediately. Lawyer Chen walked in slowly and the two of them sat on opposite sides of the sofa. Lawyer Chen looked at him. "Have you thought about it?" In fact, Shen Wenxuan had mentioned to him about opening a law firm. However, he didn't agree because he was going to retire soon. He wanted to groom his student to be his successor. The position of the chief lawyer in Stars Entertainment was not low. Shen Wenxuan had the ability to do so. Sigh, how did he get involved with Miss Su? I'll update around 10 p.m. Happy National Day, everyone. Chapter 49-20. Updated quickly, after Lawyer Chen asked, Shen Wenxuan nodded slightly and said faintly, "Yes. I've made up my mind." The teacher looked at him speechlessly. After a moment of silence, he reached out and patted his shoulder, nodding. "All right. As long as you've made up your mind." Shen Wenxuan couldn't help but explain, "My original plan was to set up my own firm. Teacher, I know you want me to stay in Stars Entertainment. That way, I can get a decent job and be like you in the future. But I don't want that. I still want to have a different life." He paused for a moment. "Maybe it's not bad to walk a single log bridge until the end." Lawyer Chen patted his shoulder and reminded him, "The one above you has a bad temper. Think about it carefully. Once you leave, there's no turning back." "I know, teacher." Shen Wenxuan smiled. Lawyer Chen was a serious old man. At this time, he was a little gossipy. "Oh right, do you really want to be with Miss Su? She's quite nice." Shen Wenxuan smiled. "I liked her a lot in school." "You liked her a lot." Lawyer Chen smiled. "She's quite nice. Quite different. You have good taste, kid." Shen Wenxuan smiled. Lawyer Chen wanted to say something else, but he thought better of it. Shen Wenxuan didn't care about it himself. What else could others say? In the afternoon, Sumu went to work and got off work a little late. Usually, at this time, when Yuan would pick up Cymbidium chinense. When Sumu got off work, the driver would send her back. When Yuan always felt that Cymbidium chinense was working too hard. He wanted Sumu to live with them. That way, Cymbidium chinense could take good care of her. Besides, Sumu didn't have to work so hard. Of course, Sumu refused. "Auntie, thank you. I'm troubling you to live here." Of course, when Yuan knew that Sumu was just unwilling. She was afraid of her son. He couldn't force the child, so he could only let the child walk more. However, when Yuan was still quite concerned about Sumu. At night, he personally brought the Cymbidium chinense over. He didn't leave immediately but brought a midnight snack for Sumu. While Sumu was eating, when Yuan asked Cymbidium chinense to go to sleep while she sat beside Sumu. "I heard that you used to study media in university. It's a pity that you didn't continue your studies." Sumu's hand paused for a moment. She smiled lightly and said, "It's all in the past. There's nothing to feel sorry about." When Yuan looked at her and coughed softly. "I know a friend, a great director, but she hasn't been filming much in recent years. Do you want to learn from her? If you want to study in a university again, that's fine too. I can arrange it. To Wen Yuan, it wasn't just because he liked Sumu. It was an accident. They had a grandson, but Sumu's life had completely changed. She wanted to make it up to him. Sumu ate slowly. She bit her lip and said softly, I don't think so. I'm fine the way I am now. Wen Yuan was a little angry. Do you want to sell shoes for the rest of your life? Not just for yourself, but for Yi Sun's sake, you should work harder. Sumu looked up at Wen Yuan. Wen Yuan looked at her too. Finally, Sumu said, let me think about it. She knew that if she went to study and work hard, the Cymbidium Chinense would definitely need the Yi family's care. Even she needed Wen Yuan to deal with some things. She felt that she had troubled the Yi family enough and didn't want to have too much to do with them. Chapter 49-21. But at the same time, she knew that Wen Yuan was right. She really should work harder for Cymbidium Chinense. Wen Yuan left. Sumu went to see her son. When she came back, she couldn't fall asleep after taking a shower, so she put on her pajamas and went to the window. Wen Yuan's words kept ringing in her mind. Sumu knew that Wen Yuan was right, but she didn't know what to do. If it was like what Wen Yuan said, she really wanted to have a close relationship with the Yi family. She didn't want that. First, it would be troublesome. Second, she really didn't want to face Yi Xiangnan. Although they had been husband and wife twice, she didn't feel anything. It was probably because she didn't like it or love it. Other than fear and nervousness, there was nothing else. Sumu stayed quietly. Suddenly, her phone on the bed rang. She walked over to take a look. It was from Shen Wenxuan. Are you asleep? I'm just done. Sumu stared at the line of words. Her vision was a little blurry. She suddenly felt that those things from long ago had come back. Her heart was very hot, and something was about to jump out. But she held it back. Sumu took the phone and typed one word at a time, I'm going to sleep soon. Okay, sleep early. Sumu replied with one word. After that, he didn't send her any more messages. But the next day, when Sumu got off work from the morning shift, she picked up Cymbidium Chinense and went home. She saw Shen Wenxuan downstairs. Shen Wenxuan got out of a white BMW and looked at the big and small pair with a smile. Cymbidium Chinense was stunned. Then, it instinctively looked at its mother and clenched its little hands. After a brief daze, Sumu smiled lightly. Then, she squatted down and said softly, Cymbidium Chinense, this is Uncle Shen. Hello, Uncle Shen. Cymbidium Chinense greeted him obediently. He quite liked this uncle. He looked very gentle. He seemed to like his mother. That was how the fathers of the children in class looked at their mothers. Cymbidium Chinense couldn't help but look at her mother. Sumu felt rather uncomfortable. She walked over and asked, how did you find this place? I asked Lawyer Chen. Shen Wenxuan smiled. Let's go eat. Are you hungry? Cymbidium Chinense was quite honest. Today's school lunch was terrible. Sumu was a little distressed, but she just touched his little head and didn't say anything else. Shen Wenxuan picked up the little fellow and said, all right, let's go eat. Let's find a restaurant that children like, okay? Sumu looked at him and wanted to refuse. It's too much trouble for you. Shen Wenxuan glanced at her and placed the little Cymbidium Chinense in the back seat of the car and fastened the seatbelt for him. Then, he opened the door to the front passenger seat for her. Get in the car. I'm off today. Sumu looked at him. Was it true? She always felt that this was not good. She was a little embarrassed and uneasy. After all, they hadn't seen each other for many years. She suddenly had a son. He she didn't know if Shen Wenxuan meant that, but she felt that he was the only one she could find. She admitted that she felt inferior. Perhaps many years ago, Su Mu still felt that her talent was enough to match Shen Wenxuan. But after many years, she no longer had this confidence. He was a prospective lawyer, and she was just a shoe seller. She suddenly felt inferior and sat in the car without saying anything. Shen Wenxuan frowned and said gently, "What's wrong?" Chapter 49-22. Shen Wenxuan was very gentle. Although he had been in the workplace for a few years, the feeling he gave Su Mu was still the same as before. Su Mu couldn't feel the changes of time in him, but he was a little more mature than before. But she still felt that it was inappropriate. She probably knew what he was thinking, but she couldn't refuse him since he didn't say it. They didn't talk much along the way until Shen Wenxuan parked the car in front of a restaurant. "We're here. There's a children's meal that Cymbidium Chinense likes. My sister had it once when she came back to China last time. It was very good." Su Mu smiled lightly. "Your sister's child is very old, right?" Shen Wenxuan smiled. "Yes, she's almost 10 years old. I'll take you to see her next time she comes back. Cymbidium Chinense should like it too. Children always like to play with other children." He paused for a moment. "It'll be more lively with more children." Su Mu didn't know how to respond to this, so she didn't speak for a long time. Shen Wenxuan got out of the car and carried Cymbidium Chinense from the back seat. Su Mu followed. She looked at Shen Wenxuan and smiled. "Thank you." Shen Wenxuan stood there and smiled. "What are you thanking me for? We have to eat when we meet old friends. Besides, Cymbidium Chinense is hungry." He lowered his head. "Isn't that right, Cymbidium Chinense?" Cymbidium Chinense's little face was slightly red. He looked at his mother and then at his uncle. He liked this uncle very much, but he was afraid that his mother would be unhappy if he said something wrong. How could Su Mu not know what the little guy was thinking? She reached out and touched his head. "Okay, let's go in." The three of them went in and sat down by the window. Shen Wenxuan ordered the food the whole time. After all, he and Su Mu had been together for a period of time, so he knew her taste, and children liked the same things. Therefore, the meal was very enjoyable. Shen Wenxuan didn't mention anything else. He just kept talking to the Cymbidium Chinense. After dinner, it was almost 8 o'clock. It was also time for the children to sleep. Shen Wenxuan paid the bill and came back. "Okay, we can go back now. Does Cymbidium Chinense have any homework to do?" Cymbidium Chinense said proudly, "I've done it in school." Shen Wenxuan smiled. "How excellent." He held the little Cymbidium Chinense's hand and walked outside. At the same time, he talked to Su Mu. It was a very normal conversation. It was probably about Su Mu's usual work hours. It was a very normal casual chat. However, they didn't know that the three of them, as well as the one who drove the same car later on, had been photographed by someone. On the same day, their pictures went on the hot search list. #Starlight CEO fiancé finds new love very quickly. It was sent to the top of the hot search. Soon, Shen Wenxuan's identity was revealed. It turned out to be Starlight's popular fried chicken. He dared to steal the boss's woman. It was very courageous. But soon, the comments of a certain university's alumni went out of the circle. Shen Wenxuan was Su Mu's boyfriend in university. Very soon, an imaginary drama came out. When Su Mu was dating Shen Wenxuan, she cheated on the CEO of Starlight. But after a few years, she still felt that old love was better. Therefore, a lot of fujoshis were imagining how the CEO of Starlight lost. When Shen Wenxuan sent Su Mu home, it was already the top of the hot search. But none of them were in the entertainment industry, and they didn't pay much attention to Weibo, so they didn't know. When Su Mu got out of the car, her phone kept ringing. She looked at it. It turned out to be Yi Xiangnan. She felt a little uncomfortable, especially in front of Shen Wenxuan. So, she hung up. Chapter 49-23. Her phone rang again. She ignored it and said goodbye to Shen Wenxuan. Shen Wenxuan also got out of the car. He hugged Cymbidium Chinense and touched his little head. Then he said, "Hurry up and go back." Sumu nodded and went home with Cymbidium Chinense. Shen Wenxuan stood alone in the old apartment for a long time. When he met Sumu again, he almost instinctively decided what to do for himself. But Sumu was different. An unforeseen event had changed Sumu. She was still the same Sumu. It was just that life had polished her. She might not be willing to be with him. It wasn't that Shen Wenxuan didn't feel her faint rejection. But if it was so easy to give up, he wouldn't have been empty all these years. Sumu couldn't be said to be very good, but no one could replace her. Just as Shen Wenxuan was feeling complicated, a silver Bentley suddenly braked beside him. He knew the person who got out of the car. It was President Yi, who he saw at the weekly morning meeting. At this time, Yi Xiangnan's expression was particularly ugly. It could almost be described as gloomy. He jumped out of the car and only took a glance at Shen Wenxuan before going upstairs. Shen Wenxuan quietly got into the car. He sat in the car for about 5 minutes and finally drove away. The next day, he found out about the hot topic and why Yi Xiangnan came over at night. At this time, Yi Xiangnan knocked on the door. Sumu thought it was Shen Wenxuan and that she had dropped something in his car, so she opened the door without thinking. Shen, then her expression froze. "Why is it you? You thought it was Lawyer Shen?" Yi Xiangnan walked past her and entered. Cymbidium Chinense was about to take a shower. When he saw him come in, he stood by the door and didn't move. Yi Xiangnan raised his chin. "Go take a shower and then go to sleep." Cymbidium Chinense didn't move. There was a hint of wariness in his eyes. He thought that his father would bully his mother. Yi Xiangnan felt a stab in his heart. This son of his was no longer close to him at all, just because Lin Lu had answered a phone call. If it was any other time, he might have coaxed him, but now he was dominated by anger. He squatted down and restrained his emotions. "Listen to me, go take a shower." Cymbidium Chinense looked up at its mother. Sumu gave him a look, and Cymbidium Chinense left. The little back view looked a little disappointed. After Cymbidium Chinense leaves, Sumu asks quietly, "What's the matter, Mr. Yi?" Yi Xiangnan frowned. "Sumu, aren't you going to watch your words?" Sumu frowns. "Does my behavior have anything to do with Mr. Yi? Take a look at Weibo." Yi Xiangnan's voice is cold. Tonight's hot topic was once exposed, and it couldn't be removed. As soon as it was removed, it was replaced by a new one. He wore a green hat very much. Sumu stared at him for a while, and then lowered her head to browse Weibo. Then she saw that she and Shen Wenxuan became the male and female protagonists. Of course, there was also the one in front of her. Sumu is quite speechless. "I'm just an ordinary person. If a meal with a friend should be magnified like this, it can only mean that Mr. Yi is a public figure. You can make it clear that it has nothing to do with me. Do you think it will be so simple?" Yi Xiangnan's voice is cold. Sumu is a little angry. "Mr. Yi, what do you want? I'm not a public figure, and I have my own life. I can't see anyone all my life just because you are the president of Stars Entertainment. Do you mean that you want to be with Shen Wenxuan?" He squints and looks at her as if judging. Chapter 49-24. You are my child's mother. Yi Xiannan said somewhat mercilessly, "After you accepted my mother's 10 million, I think you and the Yi family are bound together, and you don't belong to yourself anymore. I think Miss Su still understands the meaning of repaying kindness." Sumu just looked at him. His words were cruel but true. Indeed, Wen Yuan had just helped her solve a big problem, and Wen Yuan was very good to her and Cymbidium chinense. Yi Xiangnan paused and continued, of course, we also have a way to solve it. He looked at Su Mu and said softly, when Cymbidium chinense returns to the Yi family, Miss Su can pursue her own happiness. Su Mu's heart suddenly tightened. She looked at Yi Xiangnan in a daze. He said straightforwardly, at that time, Miss Su and I will really have nothing to do with each other. Su Mu's eyes were a little red. She said softly, Yi Xiangnan, don't take advantage of your position to bully others. Yi Xiangnan smiled very lightly. Yes, he was bullying her. He was bullying her because she had no background. He also knew that she couldn't let go of Cymbidium chinense. That was why he could take advantage of her. Su Mu confronted him for a long time and murmured, You can't take away Cymbidium chinense. I can. Yi Xiangnan squinted and said very cruelly. If she had to be with Shen Wenxuan, then he would do it. Su Mu looked at him quietly. She also knew that it was like hitting a stone with an egg if she fought against him, and she would implicate Shen Wenxuan. No matter Shen Wenxuan was in Stars Entertainment or going out to set up a firm, it was no good to fight against Yi Xiangnan. Besides, she really didn't plan to be with him. Why should she implicate him? After a long silence, Su Mu said, I know, Mr. Yi. Her voice was the same as before, but it had lost its vitality. Yi Xiangnan could feel it too, but he didn't say anything. Instead, he waited for Cymbidium chinense to come out of the bathroom before hugging him. Did you miss Daddy? Cymbidium chinense just looked at him and lowered its head. He didn't say that he wanted to, nor did he say that he didn't want to. Yi Xiangnan smiled bitterly. He knew that his son was no longer close to him. Now, he was trying to take him back. Without Su Mu's care, this child would not be happy. Therefore, when Yi Xiangnan left, he glanced at Su Mu with a heavy gaze. Su Mu didn't say anything. She just leaned against the wall. She felt that her life seemed to be tied to Yi Xiangnan's. Unless she gave him Cymbidium chinense or married him, it seemed that neither of these two possibilities would happen for the time being. Su Mu was quiet, and there was no light in her eyes. Yi Xiangnan opened the door and went out. Su Mu immediately closed the door and leaned against it as if he had a virus. Yi Xiangnan could feel it. He stood at the door and smoked a cigarette before leaving. On the way, he received a call from Yi Hui. Yi Hui's voice had an indescribable meaning. Brother, you must be with sister-in-law, right? He didn't say anything. Yi Hui said again, I saw the hot search. You must have threatened sister-in-law. The brother was speechless. After a long time, he said in a hoarse voice, She is not your sister-in-law. Then why do you care about her? Why do you care who she is dating? Yi Hui smiled and deliberately provoked him. Yi Xiangnan said coldly, I just don't want her affairs to affect Cymbidium chinense. Chapter 49-25. Isn't that normal? It won't affect Cymbidium chinense. Yi Hui smiled. Moreover, Su Mu will have to get married eventually. She can't just stay with you forever. If you don't get married, she can't get married. What kind of logic is that? Yi Xiangnan's face was a little dark. Yi Hui said again, Brother, think carefully. Are you in love with sister-in-law? If you are, you should quickly confess. Otherwise, it will be too late for you to regret it if someone else takes her away from you. I don't like her. Yi Xiangnan's voice was stiff. There was not a trace of humanity in it at all. Yi Hui's voice was very long. Is that so? Yi Xiangnan was a little impatient. Of course. What else can I do? Yi Hui was still smiling. Her temper was very good, as if she would never get angry. Often, Yi Xiangnan felt that she was not like the children of the Yi family. The children of the Yi family all had a temper, but Yi Hui was too gentle. She was so gentle that he felt that she had lost her personality. But thinking that with Yi Hui's conditions, she could be happy for a lifetime. If there were no accidents, he let her be. Besides, there was nothing bad about it. Yi Xiangnan was a little distracted. He didn't care what Yi Hui said again. Later, he hung up the phone. The next day, the trending topic finally died down. Yi Xiangnan met Shen Wenxuan in his office. In the big office, the atmosphere was subtle. The second secretary poured a cup of coffee and ran away. She didn't dare to stay and be bombarded. Shen Wenxuan was quite calm. When he knew about Su Mu's past, he had already accepted this kind of scene. Yi Xiangnan was still very polite to him. "Lawyer Shen, please sit down." He was also too polite. At least, he didn't treat an ordinary subordinate. He sat opposite Shen Wenxuan, picked up a cup of coffee, and seemed to be drinking it casually. Shen Wenxuan said indifferently, "Did you call me because of Su Mu?" Yi Xiangnan was quite impressed by his straightforwardness. It was good. He didn't like to beat around the bush, so he nodded. "Yes, Lawyer Shen should be clear about the relationship between Su Mu and me. We have a son, and we almost got married. My mother, or the Yi family, has never given up on Cymbidium chinense, so you know what I mean." Shen Wenxuan asked calmly, "CEO Yi, do you love Su Mu?" Yi Xiangnan looked at him quietly. They all knew the answer. How could the noble Gongzi Yi fall in love with someone so easily, especially an ordinary girl like Su Mu? In the story of Cinderella, the heroine was also very beautiful. Shen Wenxuan smiled bitterly, "Since I don't love her, then I won't be happy after marrying her." Why would CEO Yi torture himself? In Stars Entertainment, he naturally knew about the relationship between CEO Yi and Qin Yi Huan. It could be imagined who Yi Xiangnan had in his heart. Yi Xiangnan said indifferently, "I don't think it's torture." Because for him, it was the same no matter who he married. He didn't think there was any difference. Shen Wenxuan was a man, so he could naturally understand what he meant. He was gentle and firm. "It's unfair to Su Mu." "Unfair?" Yi Xiangnan smiled slightly. "She can get the best compensation. Fame, wealth, and even everything. Her son will be the CEO of Stars Entertainment in the future. Lawyer Shen can also understand this." Shen Wenxuan smiled very lightly. "This is not what Su Mu wants. CEO Yi, you don't know her at all." Chapter 49-26. Memorize. Yi Xiangnan stared at Shen Wenxuan. "Is that so? Does that mean you know her very well?" "A little," Shen Wenxuan replied calmly. Yi Xiangnan narrowed his eyes. The man in front of him, whether it was his birth or his current status and power, could not be compared to him. Even if he had Su Mu's past, and perhaps Su Mu's heart. He didn't expect that after so many years of poverty, even though he was as rich as a country and had so many women at his fingertips, he still couldn't win Su Mu's heart. She didn't love him. Maybe there was a chance to love, but finally that night, Yi Xiangnan didn't pester him any further. After all, he was more concerned about his reputation and whether Shen Wenxuan would stay or not. He wasn't a person who couldn't distinguish between work and private matters. He hoped that Shen Wenxuan could stay. After all, after Lawyer Chen retired, the most suitable candidate was Shen Wenxuan. From a certain point of view, Yi Xiangnan admired talented people, and there were not many people who could gain Yi Xiangnan's admiration. In his eyes, some of the middle and upper echelons were useless, and Shen Wenxuan was one of them. Shen Wenxuan didn't think too much about it. "CEO Yi, I've already decided." Yi Xiangnan looked at him for a while, then got up and walked to the French window. After a long time, he said in a low voice, "Lawyer Chen should have told you about my plan." "Shen Wenxuan, is it worth it for a woman? Is it worth it to walk this path until the end?" As he spoke, he turned to look at Shen Wenxuan. Shen Wenxuan smiled faintly. Boss Yi, there is a person I love in my life plan. Love? Yi Xiangnan said hoarsely, you guys have been apart for so many years, and so many things have happened over the years. How do you know that she still likes you? So, I want to pursue her again. Shen Wenxian said in a low voice, his voice full of emotion. This was also the first time Yi Xiangnan had seen him like this. Lawyers had always been creatures with few emotions. Shen Wenxuan used to be the same. Yi Xiangnan had always thought that he would be the best successor, but it turned out that he was just as passionate. Shen Wenxuan left. Yi Xiangnan sat alone for a while. Not long after, he received a resignation letter. Shen Wenxuan left Starlight Entertainment in advance and paid a huge sum of money for breaching the contract. The Shen family's conditions weren't bad. $1,000,000 penalty wasn't a big problem for Shen Wenxian. Yi Xiangnan held the resignation letter in his hand and looked at it quietly. After a long time, he picked up the phone on the table and called Bai Ainan's number. Bai Ainan picked up the phone and before he could speak, she said, you want to talk about Shen Wenxuan, right? Yes, I want to work with him. Shen Wenxuan is very capable. Xiangnan, I can't let go of money, can I? We are both businessmen. Think about it, he must be very busy setting up a law firm. I'm afraid he won't have time to pursue your wife. Yi Xiangnan frowned, Su Mu isn't my wife. Ex-wife, ex-girlfriend? Or an illegitimate wife? The child's mother? Bai Ainan said gloatingly. Yi Xiangnan said coldly, you sound very happy. There's nothing to be happy about. Shouldn't we hug each other for warmth? Bai Ainan said meaningfully. Of course, she wasn't talking about Su Mu but Qin Yi Huan. In the Yi family, even a fool knew that Yi Xiangnan didn't like Su Mu and couldn't forget Qin Yi Huan. He didn't give up on Su Mu because of the Cymbidium Chinense. He didn't force himself on her because of the Cymbidium Chinense. Bai Ainan sighed, Xiangnan, in fact, you can also have another choice, which is to give the Cymbidium Chinense the best and then live in peace. The Cymbidium Chinense doesn't have to be the heir of the Yi family. Think about it. Shen Ting, an outsider, has become the decision-maker. Even if the Cymbidium Chinense follows Su Mu to another family, he is still your son. What's impossible? Yi Xiangnan pursed his lips. Bai Ainan asked again, are you doing this because of the Cymbidium Chinense, for your own face, or because you can't let go of Su Mu? Have you thought about it? Of course, Yi Xiangnan wouldn't confide in her and hung up the phone. That night, he went back to Wen Yuan and Yi Mubai's place. Wen Yuan had picked up the Cymbidium Chinense because Su Mu was working at night. When the Cymbidium Chinense saw Yi Xiangnan, he called him Dad indifferently. After that, he didn't talk to him much. Yi Xiangnan sat next to him and played Lego with him silently. The Cymbidium Chinense glanced at him and then lowered his head to continue. Wen Yuan smiled, isn't it good? In the future, when the Cymbidium Chinense comes over, you can come and accompany him. Children always need the company of their parents. She paused for a moment before talking about Su Mu's work. She sighed, it's a pity. The Cymbidium Chinense probably felt that the topic was related to him. He secretly looked at his grandmother and then continued playing Lego as if nothing had happened. Yi Xiangnan looked at his mother and asked casually, what did she say? She said she wanted to think about it. When Yuan told him the truth and then warned him, don't stop her. I think Su Mu is a good seedling. Besides, she's still young. She can't live for the Cymbidium Chinense for the rest of her life. Yi Xiangnan leaned on the sofa and smiled faintly, Mom, didn't you become a full-time wife because of me and Yi Hui? As soon as he finished speaking, Wen Yuan laughed and scolded him, marry her if you can. Yi Xiangnan, Wen Yuan sighed. Perhaps your personalities just don't match. If you can't force him, then you should just let him live. As for Yi Sun, he's your son after all. He'll always be your son no matter where he goes. No one can take him away from you. There was a deeper meaning to his words. Yi Xiangnan frowned. Mom, what you said, I'm not blind. There's so much commotion. When Yuan sighed, Xiangnan, you don't like Su Mu. If she really has someone she likes, let her go. This child is quite pitiful. She gave birth to the Cymbidium chinense for you at such a young age. Yi Xiangnan didn't say anything. He didn't agree or disagree. But no one expected that before Yi Xiangnan could do anything, the Shen family would make a move first. Shen Wenxuan's parents and sister were both abroad. No one knew how she got the news. 2 days later, Shen Wenyuan flew back to City B and made an appointment to meet Su Mu. The meeting place was booked by Shen Wenyuan. It was a high-class coffee shop. Su Mu went after work. Because she was in a hurry, she didn't have time to change out of her work clothes. She sat opposite Su Wenyuan. In the past, she and Su Wenyuan had met once or twice. At that time, Shen Wenyuan had been polite to her, unlike this time, who was neither cold nor warm. Her gaze was even a little harsh. Shen Wenyuan ordered a cup of coffee for her and then went straight to the point. Miss Su, why don't you name a price? Chapter 49-27. Shen Wenyuan automatically ordered a cup of coffee for her and then went straight to the point. Miss Su, why don't you name a price? Su Mu looked up and stared at Shen Wenyuan. After a while, she said softly, I don't know what you mean. Shen Wenyuan came from a good family and married well. She was used to living a comfortable life and didn't know the taste of suffering. Besides, Su Mu was pregnant out of wedlock and had an ambiguous relationship with her younger brother. Of course, she didn't have a good impression of Su Mu, nor would she be nice to her. This time, she came back under the order of her parents to solve this problem. No matter what, she couldn't let Wen Xian continue to make mistakes and marry a woman who gave birth to a child out of wedlock. In terms of qualifications, reputation, and appearance, Su Mu wasn't good in any of them. In the past, she might have had some talent that made the Shen family look at her differently, but now, it was polite to say that she was worthless. She gave birth to a son for the Yi family, but the Yi family didn't let her marry into the family. Now, they were forcing her to marry Wen Xian. How could there be such a good thing in the world? Just thinking about it made Shen Wenyuan feel even more disgusted. The way she looked at Su Mu became even more impolite and even a little contemptuous. Miss Su, don't pretend to be innocent. I know what girls like you think. Don't you just want money or a high status? Let me tell you now, our Wen Xian will never be a taker. Even if he can't survive in B City, he can go abroad and have me and my parents to take care of him. The Shen family's property is enough for him to live a carefree life for the rest of his life. But Miss Su, it's different. I heard that your mother broke off relations with you and even published your name in the newspaper. Our Shen family can't tolerate a reputation like yours. Su Mu was so angry that her fingers were trembling. She held the cup and tried her best to steady it. Her lowered eyes revealed no emotions. After a long time, she looked up at the domineering woman in front of her and said softly, Miss Shen, Shen Wenxuan and I are in the past. I've never thought about anything else. If you're worried, you can follow him around every day. Shen Wenyuan didn't expect that a lowly person like Su Mu would dare to refute her words like this, and she even raised herself so much, as if it was Wen Xian who took the initiative to pester her. Her voice was cold as she said rudely, Miss Su is eloquent, but I'm not here to learn from Miss Su's eloquence today. I just want Miss Su to promise not to meet Wen Xian in the future. That's all. Name your price. Su Mu stared at her. The other party's attitude was especially arrogant, as if she could take out money and knock her out at any time. Su Mu said very softly, 100 million. Will you give it to me? What? Shen Wenxuan's face couldn't hold back any longer. He almost lost his composure as he said, Su Mu, don't push your luck. 100 million, why don't you just rob a bank? Since you can come over and throw money at me, you should be able to afford it. Su Mu's expression was a little cold as well. So, excuse me, Miss Shen. She stood up and was about to leave. Shen Wenyuan was so angry that she lost her composure and grabbed onto Su Mu, forgetting her status. A cup of coffee was splashed onto Su Mu's face. It was very hot. Very quickly, Su Mu's face was a little red, but it wasn't to the point of injury. She just looked a little embarrassed. She looked up and wanted to say something, but a pair of hands pressed down on her shoulders. It was a very gentle force. Su Mu was a little surprised and turned her head. It was Wen Yuan. Wen Yuan was drinking coffee with He Huan and talking about introducing Su Mu to He Huan so that He Huan could teach Su Mu a lesson. He didn't want to witness such a scene. Originally, it wasn't convenient for him to intervene. After all, it was Su Mu's personal matter. But he didn't expect the other party to be so domineering and unreasonable. He Huan and Wen Yuan both felt that in a place like B City, even the two of them and Bai Shuali wouldn't do such a thing. Who was the Shen family? They had never heard of it. They were just a little rich. In the circle of B City, one couldn't enter without power. The Shen family was really not ranked. At this time, Wen Yuan was going to come out no matter what. He pressed down on Su Mu and said in a low voice, "Wipe your face first and leave it to me." Su Mu was stunned. She wanted to say something. Her lips moved, but in the end, she didn't say anything. He Huan pulled her over and handed her a tissue. And Wen Yuan had a faint smile on his face. Shen Wenyuan was shocked. She didn't expect to meet Wen Yuan. Wen Yuan, Yimubai's wife, was also considered the boss of Wen Xian. Now, was Wen Yuan going to stand up for Su Mu? It was obvious that the Yi family didn't want Su Mu. How could it be? Just as she was thinking about it, Wen Yuan said in a calm tone, "Miss Shen, you may be mistaken. It's not that our Xiangnan doesn't want Su Mu, it's that Su Mu refuses to marry into the Yi family. We thought that Su Mu has high standards and we can't force it. We are happy and blessed that Su Mu is willing to look up to Lawyer Shen, but we didn't expect the Shen family's attitude to be like this. Since this is the case, we can't force it. But Miss Shen is too petty and ungentlemanly." This cup of coffee was poured on Su Mu's face, but it's the same as splashing on my face and the Yi family's face. No one dares to disrespect the Yi family like this. The Yi family? Shen Wenyuan's heart trembled when she caught this information. Wen Yuan smiled faintly. "Miss Shen, how do you think today's matter should be resolved?" Shen Wenyuan felt that she must find out now when did Su Mu become a member of the Yi family. What's the relationship between Miss Su and the Yi family now? She asked in a trembling voice. Wen Yuan smiled faintly and calmly. "I intend to accept Su Mu as my goddaughter. Miss Shen, do you think my goddaughter is qualified to marry into the Shen family?" These words made Shen Wenyuan speechless. It was not her intention to say that it was not enough. Her face turned pale. She knew that today's matter could not be resolved peacefully. Wen Yuan would not let her go easily. After a long time, she said softly, "Madam Yi, it's my fault today." Wen Yuan smiled. "You are very sensible. You don't need me to teach you what to do you?" His tone was still light and calm. People were often like this. The higher they stood, the less flustered and exasperated they were. Only the nouveau riche would think that the world revolved around them and talk about money every time they opened their mouths. Shen Wenyuan was a mean person, but she was also very smart. She forced a smile and then picked up a cup of coffee on the table. When she was about to move, Wen Yuan stopped her. "Wait a minute." She thought that Wen Yuan would let her go, but Wen Yuan said to the waiter, "Give me a hot cup." Shen Wenyuan was stunned at once. She did not expect that Wen Yuan would do this. Chapter 49-28. Shen Wenyuan was truly stunned. She did not expect Wen Yuan to treat her like that. She was at least a little famous in B City and could be considered a socialite, but Wen Yuan treated her like that. While his face was pale, the waiter brought a cup of hot coffee over. It wouldn't hurt, but it would definitely make him very uncomfortable. The waiter was very polite. "Miss, your coffee." Shen Wenyuan was very embarrassed. She looked at Wen Yuan. Wen Yuan sat down calmly, looking very patient. Shen Wenyuan knew that she was in trouble. She had no choice but to accept the cup of coffee that day. So, she gritted her teeth, raised the cup with her eyes closed, and poured it over her head. The surroundings were quiet. Everyone was watching the drama unfold. After the cup of coffee was poured, Wen Yuan smiled faintly. "Miss Shen, take it as a lesson. At the same time, I'll teach you how to behave." After saying that, he took his bag and walked towards Sumu. Suddenly, he turned around. "Even our Xiangnan can't bully her. What right do you have to bully her?" Those words made Shen Wenyuan even more embarrassed. She stood there and accepted the mocking gazes. She had never been so embarrassed since she was young. So, she gritted her teeth in anger. "Sumu, don't even think about entering the Shen family." One had to admit that this big sister was really good at acting out. Sumu had already said that she had no intentions. She herself did not have 100 million. On the other side, Wen Yuan looked at Sumu gently and lovingly. "It's almost too late. I'll go with you to pick up Cymbidium chinense." After the storm, it was indeed too late. So, the two of them got into the driver's car together. In the car, Wen Yuan slowly explained his plans. He wanted Sumu to continue her studies in media. In addition, he also arranged for her to learn how to make movies and documentaries from He Huan. Not everyone had the opportunity to have such connections and resources. Sumu was silent for a while. Wen Yuan said softly, "Are you still hesitating now? Look at how Shen Wenyuan can climb over your head and bully you as she pleases today. Who will appear tomorrow? Cymbidium chinense is still young. He won't always be a child. He needs a strong person on his path of growth. If that person isn't Xiangnan, it has to be you." Su Mu's lips moved. Wen Yuan smiled lightly. "Don't you think so?" Su Mu knew that she was right. That's right. Today, she had deeply experienced how important social status was to a person, and how much confidence it could bring to a person. Wen Yuan picked up Cymbidium chinense with her. After sending the mother and son back, they left. It was already late. Su Mu was cooking quietly. Cymbidium chinense kept feeling that there was something wrong with his mother today. However, he didn't dare to ask. He could only lean on Su Mu. Su Mu lowered her head and looked at him. Then, she smiled slightly. "What's wrong, Cymbidium chinense?" "Mom." Cymbidium chinense said softly, "A child said that I don't have a father." Su Mu's heart ached. She squatted down and reached out to touch his little head. How can Cymbidium chinense not have a father? Cymbidium chinense just doesn't have a father. Cymbidium chinense looked straight at Su Mu. He suddenly said, "Mom, what about Uncle Shen?" His little face revealed a trace of longing. Su Mu was stunned for a moment. Then, she said softly, "Uncle Shen is Uncle Shen." Chapter 49-29. Su Mu was stunned for a moment, then she said softly, "Uncle Shen is Uncle Shen. Will he come again? Will he take us out for dinner?" Cymbidium chinense asked carefully. "What do you want to eat?" "Mummy will take you out." Su Mu was stunned for a moment, then she said softly, "Uncle Shen is Uncle Shen. Will he come again? Will he take us out for dinner?" Cymbidium chinense asked carefully. But Cymbidium chinense suddenly hugged her, his small body soft and warm. Su Mu's heart softened, but her eyes were a little watery. She tried her best to hold it in. She was Cymbidium Chinen's mother, she couldn't cry in front of her child. Cymbidium Chinense only asked about the things in school, but Sumu knew that he was very concerned about it. She thought that maybe she really should listen to Wen Yuan's advice. She worked so hard to make Cymbidium Chinense have enough to eat, but she couldn't give him respect and protect him from being hurt by rumors. She squatted down and touched her son's face gently, saying softly, "Mummy might have to go to school too. I will work hard with Cymbidium Chinense in the future." Also, Mummy had no family. Other than Daddy, Mummy had no one else. Cymbidium Chinense was the only one she had. Cymbidium Chinense was very surprised, staring at her. Sumu hugged him, feeling his warm little body. When Yuan was right, she was only 24 years old, she should make plans for Cymbidium Chinense, but at the same time, she was not only Cymbidium Chinense's mother, but also Sumu. She should live like herself, not live as an accessory in someone else's life. Asterisk at the same time, Shen Wenyuan flew into a rage at Shen Wenshuan. In Shen Wenshuan's luxurious condominium, Shen Wenyuan's words were very rude. "Wenshuan, how can you not forget such a shameless woman? Don't you know that she had a child with someone else? How old is that child? If you're with her, how are you going to go out in the future? How will others look at you? Picking up Yi Xiangnan's old shoes?" Shen Wenyuan. Shen Wenshuan stared at her. "What exactly do you want? What did you do to Sumu?" "What did I do? Why don't you ask her what she did to your sister? I'm just giving her a price to leave you. This is also what Dad and Mom want. Do you know that she's asking for 100 million the moment she opens her mouth? I've never seen such a shameless girl. Who does she think she is?" Shen Wenyuan was probably furious as she desperately vented her anger. Shen Wenshuan calmed down and looked at his sister quietly. "I know what kind of person Sumu is." "What do you know?" Shen Wenyuan sneered. "Do you know that she's connected to the Yi family? The Yi family is supporting her. Wenshuan, don't hit the wall. I've already spoken to Dad and Mom about this. They've already found a girl for you. She's quite nice and she's a little famous for playing the violin. I've seen her photos. Her looks are way better than Sumu's. She has a good personality and temper. You'll like her." Shen Wenshuan looked down. "How would you know whether I like her or not?" Shen Wenyuan said matter-of-factly, "Marriages are all about matching families. You and Sumu are not compatible in any way. Besides, she has a child, so it won't help your career at all." Shen Wenshuan frowned. "I don't need anyone's help." After he said that, Shen Wenyuan sneered again. "Everyone likes the icing on the cake. Wenshuan, her father is the principal of Media College. You know how important that is. Dad and Mom are doing this for your own good. They've given you ample consideration when choosing a partner. Besides, even if they don't consider all this, you'll still need funds if you want to set up an agency. You can fork out a few million, but I think you'll still need Dad and Mom's support for 20 to 30 million. This isn't something that Sumu can help you with. Think about it carefully. You're not a child anymore, so don't let your emotions get the better of you." Shen Wenshuan looked at his sister quietly. She seemed a little unfamiliar, as though he didn't know her at all. He remembered that many years ago, Shen Wenyuan had fallen in love with a man from an ordinary family. Her parents naturally disapproved of it. Shen Wenyuan ran away from home and pretended to jump off a building, causing a huge ruckus. Chapter 49-30. But after a few years, she, who had married well, didn't even have the slightest bit of affection for him. In her heart, there was only profit and profit. Could the environment really change a person? Shen Wenshuan said calmly, "I can solve it myself. I don't need my family's support." Shen Wenyuan was stunned. The corners of her eyes were twitching. She looked at her brother in disbelief and murmured, is it worth it for a woman? Shen Wenxuan said firmly, I like her. I want her to be my wife, sister. That's it. It couldn't be anyone else but her. With that, he opened the door and walked out. Shen Wenyuan came back to her senses and shouted behind him, you'll regret it. You'll kill yourself. No, she couldn't let him go against the Yi family. She couldn't let her brother be with such a woman. Otherwise, Wen Xian's life would be over. However, she couldn't represent anyone, and she couldn't decide anything for others. Shen Wenxuan could decide anything for himself. When he met Su Mu again, he didn't even think about it before betting everything on his future, career, marriage, and even family. He drove to Su Mu's old apartment and parked the car downstairs, but he didn't go up. He just stood quietly under an old tree and smoked. He held a cell phone in his other hand, hesitating whether or not to call her. Su Mu went downstairs to take out the trash and saw Shen Wenxuan standing there. She was stunned for a moment, but she still walked over slowly. Why are you here? She stood in front of him and asked softly. Shen Wenxuan also looked at her quietly and smiled slightly, I just happened to pass by. Neither of them mentioned Shen Wenyuan, but they both knew that the other knew. It wasn't a pleasant matter, and if they were to talk about it, they would definitely talk about something else. He couldn't give her a promise right now, and she didn't think about it. The two of them stood face to face. After a long time, Shen Wenxuan said, Have you eaten? Yes, what about you? Su Mu guessed. If you haven't eaten, I'll give you the next bowl of noodles. Shen Wenxuan hesitated for a second, then smiled. Okay. Su Mu threw away the trash and went back to the small house with him. It was very simple. But he felt at ease. As soon as Shen Wenxuan entered, Cymbidium Chinense happily rushed over. Uncle Shen. Shen Wenxuan picked him up and kissed his forehead. Are you happy to see me? Cymbidium Chinense said very sweetly that it was happy, and then hugged his neck worriedly. Su Mu watched their interaction and quietly went to the kitchen. Her eyes were a little hot. She knew that if it hadn't been for the accident, she would have married Shen Wenxuan and had a smart child like Cymbidium Chinense. She would have lived an ordinary but happy life. However, there were no ifs in life. They had missed each other. She was no longer a naive little girl who thought that they could be together as long as they truly loved each other. Relationships that didn't receive blessings usually had a bleak ending. She cut the ginger and thought absent-mindedly, he must be very sad. She knew that Shen Wenxuan wanted to persist, but sometimes persistence couldn't overcome reality. They couldn't afford to wait for each other. After spending 10 minutes, she made a bowl of noodles and brought it out. The aroma filled the air. Cymbidium Chinense said proudly, My mother makes the best noodles. Shen Wenxuan smiled. It smells good. Cymbidium Chinense was even more proud. Chapter 49-31. Updated quickly, Cymbidium Chinense was even prouder. He looked at Shen Wenxuan and said, Uncle, try it. Shen Wenxuan smiled and then looked at Su Mu deeply. Such a calm and warm moment would probably not last long in the future. Shen Wenxuan was a gentle and determined person, and at the same time, he was also pragmatic. They were all adults, and they knew that love wasn't enough. He could give her a stable life now, but it didn't include so many external pressures. Shen Wenxuan sat down and ate the noodles. It was delicious. There was a feeling that when you came back from outside, your wife had already prepared dinner. Originally, they could have spent the rest of their lives together like this. Shen Wenxuan originally wanted to go out, but because he was waiting for Su Mu, he didn't give up, so he stayed. Su Mu was there, but they weren't the same anymore. Shen Wenxuan finished eating the noodles, looked up and smiled. It's really delicious. Little Cymbidium Chinense wanted to be proud, but the little person also saw that something was wrong with Uncle Shen, as if he was about to cry, so he lowered his head dejectedly. Mom, I'm going to take a shower. Sumu smiled and little Cymbidium chinense ran away. Shen Wenxuan sat in front of the simple small dining table. He wanted to smoke, but he gave up when he thought that he was indoors. He turned his head and looked at Sumu quietly. I thought that people who like each other would get married soon. Sumu was quite indifferent. After cleaning up the bowls, he sat opposite to Shen Wenxuan. Shen Wenxuan, let bygones be bygones. Don't think about it anymore. Really, I don't think your life should be tied with mine. It won't do you any good. You think so? Shen Wenxuan smiled bitterly. Yes, he was already 27 years old. He was no longer a young boy. He couldn't say that he wanted her to follow him regardless of everything, and it was even more impossible. After Shen Wenxuan finished speaking, Sumu smiled slightly. She knew everything. He was in a difficult position, and he didn't dare to let go. She was the same. In the adult world, love couldn't solve everything. She didn't want to implicate him either. Their eyes met, and in the end, they did not say anything. Cymbidium chinense finished showering and rolled under the blanket. It was getting late, so Sumu walked him downstairs. When they got downstairs, Shen Wenxuan reached out to open the car door. He paused for a moment and turned back to look at Sumu. I apologize on behalf of my sister. Sumu shook her head. She's not that good either. Besides, this had nothing to do with Shen Wenxuan. He didn't need to apologize. Shen Wenxuan knew that Sumu was never weak, but he also knew how strong his sister was. Shen Wenyuan, who used to be crazy for love, was long gone. Sumu didn't say anything else. She just stood under the streetlight and smiled calmly. Shen Wenxuan didn't say anything else. He opened the car door and got into the car. After getting in, he rolled down the window. Sumu. She grunted. Just like in the past. Shen Wenxuan's gaze deepened. After a while, he said, I'm leaving. He didn't say anything else, because he would only burden Sumu. Adult love has always been related to reality. After Shen Wenxuan left, Sumu stood there for a long time. When she was about to go back, a black sports car screeched to a stop next to her. It was none other than Yi Xiangnan. When he arrived, he bumped into Shen Wenxuan. At this moment, he got out of the car, and his expression was naturally not very good. He walked to Sumu. Sumu looked at him. Are you here to see Cymbidium chinense? As soon as she finished speaking, Yi Xiangnan held her shoulders. The next second, she fell into his arms. Chapter 49-32. As soon as she finished speaking, Yi Xiangnan held her shoulders. The next second, she fell into his arms. Her nose was full of warm breath. Sumu's face was a little hot. After a long time, she came to her senses and said in a low voice, Yi Xiangnan, let me go. Flirting all day long. He said in a hoarse voice. Obviously, he looked so ordinary. Sumu bit her lips. Yi Xiangnan, tell me clearly, who is flirting? But as soon as she finished asking, she couldn't say anything anymore. Her fingers clenched into fists on his shoulders, and her voice was also broken. Let go of me. But not only did he not let go, but he went even further. When he let go of her, Sumu couldn't help but slap him in the face. This was the second time she slapped him. Yi Xiangnan was a little angry. He grabbed her hand and raised his hand high, as if he was going to slap her back. Sumu didn't avoid it, but just stared at him. Yi Xiangnan sneered, when facing Shen Wenxuan, you are as gentle as water, but when you see me, you look like you have seen a ghost. Is he so good? Don't forget that the person who was your wife was me, and you didn't refuse him that day. Why, if you knew that you would meet him, you wouldn't have moved to my place. Do you regret it now? Sumu stared at him. Yi Xiangnan sneered again, and said in a low voice, give me Cymbidium chinense, and I will set you free. Sumu pushed him away suddenly, and she smiled a little mockingly. Mr. Yi, do you think I am a 3-year-old child? If I give you Cymbidium chinense, will you really let me go? No, he wouldn't. He would never allow the mother of Cymbidium chinense to marry someone else. This was the domineering way of the rich. She couldn't understand it, but she could imagine it. Yi Xiangnan smiled faintly. He placed his finger on his lips and did not deny it. This was also the main reason why Sumu gave up on Shen Wenxuan. It was not because of the Shen family, but because of Yi Xiangnan. She couldn't let Shen Wenxuan's every step become difficult because of her. He had his dreams and his career. There was really no need for him to sacrifice everything for her. People could be a little selfish, but not too selfish. Sumu stepped back while Yi Xiangnan put his hand in his pocket and said faintly, I just came to tell you that Cymbidium chinense will stay at my parents' place from tomorrow onwards. As for you, I can live here. Sumu said lightly, you don't have to worry about it, Mr. Yi. Yi Xiangnan frowned and smiled. Sumu, sometimes you really have no conscience. To put it bluntly, you are a traitor. It has always been the Yi family who has helped you. As for Shen Wenxuan's sister, I don't need to remind you what she did today. Why are you still helping her? You are guarding against me like a thief. After all, I am also the father of Cymbidium chinense. Sumu suppressed herself. Cymbidium chinense is Cymbidium chinense. I am me. Yi Xiangnan stared at her and said very slowly, it seems that in your heart, you still want to be with Shen Wenxuan one day. But Sumu, I can tell you that it is absolutely impossible. Sumu stared at him with her eyes full of resistance and disgust. She really didn't like him at all. She hated him so much. You will be willing to go to the Yi family. Yi Xiangnan walked forward and reached out to pinch her chin. You'd better get rid of the things that shouldn't be in your heart. Don't let me know that you are thinking about someone else. Draw 3 movie tickets. How to get them? Open the red envelope on Alipay. Enter the password, Happy Birthday Jean. First come, first served. Chapter 49-33. Updated quickly. After saying that, he let go of her. He took a step back and looked at her. Sumu's lips were tightly pursed as he looked at him quietly. Even if there was no relationship between them, it was still unfair. Without any relationship, all of her major decisions in private life were decided by the Yi family. Wen Yuan had good intentions, but it was also a form of restraint. Sumu was very sober. She had a person in her heart, but he might be buried in her heart forever. If she didn't want Shen Wenxuan to die with her, then she must let go of this person. Sumu said softly, Yi Xiangnan, we can take our time. You will be the one to get married first. Is that so? He smiled, looked at her again, and then slowly walked upstairs. Sumu called him from behind, Yi Xiangnan. He paused and turned his head to look at him. Sumu said softly, you think marriage can be without love and loyalty, don't you? He didn't speak and still looked at her with deep eyes. Sumu smiled a little bitterly, but I'm not. She paused and said bitterly, I'm still looking forward to marriage. I don't think marriage is like that. It's not what I want, nor is it what Cymbidium chinense thinks. Mr. Yi, you too. You shouldn't stop looking forward to it so early. You should find a woman you love to get married. Yi Xiangnan sneered, I am. But don't you know why I want to marry you, Sumu? Sumu's face was pale under the street lamp. After a while, she whispered, sorry. It's too late. He said coldly, and then turned around and walked upstairs. Come and open the door. I want to see Cymbidium chinense. Sumu bit her lip and went upstairs. He stepped aside to let her open the door. The light was dim, and she couldn't see his face clearly. Suddenly, Yi Xiannan reached out and clasped her shoulder, pressing her against a nearby wall. With a thoughtful look in his eyes, he said, your eyes are very red. Did you cry? Did you cry for Shen Wenxuan? No. Su Mu denied it quickly. She didn't want to talk nonsense with him. She took the key and opened the door. When the door was opened, he grabbed her hand. It was a little indecent when he pulled her. And all this was seen by Cymbidium chinense. The little person wore a white bathrobe and looked here eagerly. He remembered that his mother went downstairs to throw the garbage. Why did his father come here? Yi Xiannan quickly let go of Su Mu and walked over to carry Yi Sun. You're still awake? Cymbidium chinense whispered, can't. Yi Xiannan smiled, can't you tell me a story? Cymbidium chinense didn't feel that he was that close to him, but he was a child after all. He thought of the warmth before and was a little fascinated and hesitated. Yi Xiangnan carried him to the small bedroom. The bed that Cymbidium chinense slept on was only 1.2 meters. Although it was simple, the whole room was very clean and tidy. Even the quilt and pillow smelled like the sun. It was so puffy that it made people feel very comfortable. One big and one small lay down, and they had already occupied the bed. Cymbidium chinense was stuffed under the quilt, and only his little head came out. He was resisting and yearning at the same time. It was so difficult for him. Yi Xiang was lying on the south side, holding the little fellow in her arms and telling him a story in a low voice. After telling the story about Snow White, when it came to Cinderella, the little Cymbidium chinense finally couldn't help saying, Dad, I'm not a little girl. You're tuning into the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.